What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the upcoming Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the upcoming release of World of Warcraft Classic. Today we've got another huge show with a little bit of everything for you as we chat about some updated beta impressions, the policing of dueling tournaments, the blue post about hit caps and general warrior and melee theory crafting, and a big talk about Priest PvE play. Now, I know that the beta's level cap was just raised to 40. Arathi Basin will be unlocked for testing, and there's now just a nominal fee to pay for respecking, which is great to see, but I'll wait until next week perhaps to comment further on those changes, as that news just dropped the day of this show's release. But it's great to see Blizzard extending the bounds of testing of the beta, and it's also awesome seeing a few more people get access over the last couple of days as well. So that's good stuff that we'll get to next week on the show for sure. So you all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you're hearing, join the Discord now and keep the conversations going with us all over there. Follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2. Email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com, and please do be sure to tell a friend about the show. That really helps us out here. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode, along with the show's Patreon link if you'd really like to help keep the show going over there. Or if subscriptions aren't your thing, then you can help keep the lights on at Countdown by checking out the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi. There's also the show's merch store with some great designs over there for t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, etc. So be sure to check that link too. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get into it with Calling Countdown. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and I've got a bunch of listeners on the line to talk about something that has just come up in the last 24 hours, and I wanted to really get this one out there in this week's episode as it's kind of really topical and hot off the press, if you will, as a lot of us watched a big dueling tournament on Twitch the other day, and a lot of big names were involved, and ultimately Venruki came out the victor. I'm really trying to get Venruki on the show, and he and I have been trading messages, so hopefully that chat comes one day soon, perhaps in the next episode. But for now, another issue arose out of this dueling tournament, and that's got the community all abuzz about the subject matter of griefing and TOS and streaming dueling tournaments, and the whole manner in which Blizzard deals with how Classic will be portrayed online, if you will, via streaming and these community events going forward. So I put the word out there to the community and said, look guys, I'd love to get people on both sides of the coin here, as we do on the show. People who feel that perhaps people who grief events like this should be banned, and then there's others who feel absolutely not, they shouldn't be banned. So I called out for a variety of opinions, but however, we got all of you on the same side of the coin who feel that it's not necessarily a bannable offense and perhaps no action should be taken. So to balance it out, I will argue the other way, even though I don't believe a skerrick of what I'm about to say during this call. I'm with all of you. I want everyone to realize that. I will just play devil's advocate. So I'll start off with this. Let's say hello to everyone. Ayle, welcome back, man.
Thanks for having me on again, Josh.
My pleasure. And Corazu, first timer, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Rue, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And welcome to Shlapshtick, a bunch of first-timers. It's great to hear you all.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Okay, guys, let's get straight into it. Ayle, you're a veteran. I'll get you to kick us off. Tell us what you... Well, how about this? I'll summarize basically the facts for everyone if you're not aware. One player, a Tauren... I mean, really, it comes down to a quick summary. They were just getting in the way. They were body-blocking players, body-blocking totems and whatnot, so it was making targeting hard and things like that. jumping all over the place, moving around, and just making this dueling tournament difficult for the people who were involved, and obviously annoying for the people who were watching. That's pretty much the long and short of it. Now, eventually, this player was transported by the GMs to another area. They wound up whispering another person. There's a screenshot online of them saying, "Oh, I was just basically sent away. I think they were sent to Winterspring." Is that right, Ayle? Is that what your understanding was?
I'm not actually sure what happened. I was there at the event, watching it and filming it. And at some point, there was actually two of them. There was Troll God X and Troll God Y were both kind of just vanished.
Basically, people have been showing up with, a bit of evidence, if you will, saying like, yes, apparently this player got in touch with people saying I was sent to Winterspring. So be it. It wasn't layering. It wasn't anything like that. It was a straight up transportation. So Ayle, just kick us off with, how did you feel about everything as you were there watching it?
Definitely, as a spectator, I felt very frustrated, watching. It was difficult. They did a really good job of, obscuring, being able to see the gameplay and what was happening. Because they're Tauren, their models are so big, they're able to completely block out totems and players and things like that. So as a spectator, it was very frustrating.
And so how did you feel about what action should be taken as a result of what you saw?
Well, believe it or not, to kind of contradict what I said earlier, I don't really believe any action should have been taken whatsoever.
Okay. Now, we'll go down the line here. And Corazu, were you there watching live, or how do you feel about what action Blizzard should take as a result of what Troll God X or Troll God Y did?
Well, I wasn't there watching live, but I certainly read about it on Reddit later in the day. And I believe part of the problem was they decided to hold it in a lobby zone to prevent larger gank squads from interfering with the tournament, which had the unfortunate side effect of being easy access for a low-level alt to get there and not allowing them to have sort of like dual guards to keep those types of people in line by just removing them from the situation. I think when you get to actual classic release, this sort of thing kind of goes away when you can hold it in higher level zones away from the starter zones, which means that people either have to put in an insane amount of effort to grief and can be policed, or if they're using their mains, they're putting their reputation on the line. And I think that Blizzard has made it very clear that they want this sort of thing to be community policed, have it up to your social reputation, and let it be like that. I think there is some sort of line. I don't know where that line is with griefing, where Blizzard needs to step in. I also don't have a problem with the GM having stepped in and deciding to teleport that person away because they were griefing it. If Blizzard decides that they want to support these types of events, and I believe I saw that they ended up teleporting the dueling to like a glitched out area where other people couldn't get to. If Blizzard decides that they want to support events like this in that way, I think that's a great idea. But as far as banning griefers for something like this, I think that's just kind of in the spirit of Classic, in the spirit of vanilla, and I don't think they should be banned for something like this.
Can I comment on just a couple things?
Go for it.
Quick. So it was actually the tournament organizers decided to move the event away from the Barrens into a place you could only get into through some specific wall jumps, which is in Western Tearsfall Glades. I don't believe that was like organized by Blizzard. It was organized by the people holding the event in a way to kind of make it harder for people to get there. But unfortunately, the trolls knew how to get there as well,
right,
and knew the location just by seeing it, and were able to continue griefing, unfortunately.
Rue, I'll turn to you and just sort of say, before we start talking about the specifics of banning and TOS and things like that, just in regards to Blizzard actually stepping in and transporting this player away in this particular moment, how do you feel about that, about the intervention from Blizzard just to basically make this a more spectator-friendly event?
Well, I was watching on Soda Pop, and not through the mainstream through Tips Out, but basically they all started saying on there to start reporting the characters, and hopefully some GM would come step in. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, because I did see people start saying that they were going to hop over and right click on them and do whatever you do to report them. But I thought that was kind of cool in a way, because this is different than normal WoW. This is the beta. Not everyone's in there playing. There's a handful, and there were like 125,000 people watching it. So it's kind of like a streaker going across the World Cup, in my opinion. Like at some point, someone's going to have to step in and move them. I mean, they didn't have to do that, but it was kind of nice that whatever happened, happened. I did find it a little unfair in a way that the later ones where the troll was removed didn't have to deal with the same obstacles, when I know for a fact someone got out because they were blocking a totem, and they were very upset about that. So, you know, I kind of think that no intervention would have been more fair for the tournament.
That's a good point, honestly.
Well, on that, and I think the streaker analogy is a great one to raise. I was actually considering bringing that up later on, but now that we're here, let's talk about streaking. So Shlapshtick, in that vein, I think it's a fair one to draw, because the only difference would be, however, that it seems that some of the arguments are that, well, streaking, if you will, is sometimes allowed in WoW, and people are saying, well, it's just if you streak for too long, then maybe you come up against TOS issues. So do you feel like in and of itself, if they were jumping around, blocking people, blocking totems, if they'd done it for, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, then that's fine, leave it be. But, because they were doing it for hours, that's where it crosses the line. So it becomes somewhat arbitrary in a way, where you have to draw a line somewhere. But how do you feel about whether it should be a blanket, no, this is an offense, or like it's circumstantial?
Well, that's the thing, is that, I mean, like a streaker, there'll always be trolls in everything. Like there'll be, you know, there's trolls at sporting events, there's trolls in video games. It's just unavoidable, you know, they're everywhere. And so you can't ban all of them, because you won't be able to. There's too many, you know, it's overwhelming. Of course it sucks. Well, streaking is kind of funny. I think we all agree on that. But yeah, I mean, that's just how it goes.
All right, guys, I'll jump in at this point and just sort of reiterate that, again, I'm in the camp of this isn't a big deal in terms of bannable offenses. I wouldn't quite go that far, but again, I'll argue for some of the points that we haven't heard so far. If I were to put to you guys the following, I want to hear what anyone has in reply to this, because these are some of the arguments that I do see turning up, and I'll give voice to them. You know, it absolutely should be bannable, and here's why. It is a large-scale community event that is made in this is the spirit of vanilla we're talking about. It's like the spirit of Christmas. We're all a community. We love having these fun events and whatnot. And if one person wants to come along and ruin the fun of 125,000 people or whatever it might be, and they're blatantly taking hours out of their day to fuck with the people who are trying to get involved in this dueling tournament, which has some serious cash on the line or whatever, then they should be banned. They are going against, and I'll read this one out because this is the one that everyone cites. You know, obviously the end user license agreement, and I'll get very technical for you and cite section 1C11.2, which obviously is the one everyone talks about, that says harassment, griefing in quote marks, abusive behavior or chat, conduct intended to unreasonably undermine or disrupt the game experiences of other, deliberate inactivity or disconnecting, and / or any other activity which violates Blizzard's code of conduct or in-game policies. So this is the subsection that everyone says would amount to either griefing, if you can classify it as griefing. You could possibly throw it under the harassment term. But realistically, you've then got the general one that just says conduct intended to unreasonably undermine or disrupt the game experiences of others. So right there, you are disrupting the game experiences of others, even if that game experience is simply spectating something. So it's kind of a gotcha moment. Well, right there, it's kept open and vague, and for good reason by Blizzard. All of these sort of, clauses, if you will, are kept rather vague so that Blizzard ultimately has a fair bit of leeway in terms of who they do and do not ban. But right there, it's suggested that it could be bannable, thus take action. So who has anything to say about that? It's there in writing, baby. Come at me. Why shouldn't they be banned?
I'd like to take the lead on this one. I think it's a dangerous precedent to set. I think that the more specific you get with this, the more it's going to seep into other aspects of the game. Like, what's the point of being on a PvP server if, running through town and killing low levels is going to be considered griefing eventually because we disrupted their gameplay. Like, I think the more broad you keep, in the end, yes, this one or two trolls were really annoying. But do we really want to open that Pandora's box and be regulated on every single thing we do? Every time, us little horde players get a little drunk and think it's funny to go whack out some alliances or something. Like, I think it's a dangerous box to open, and I would just rather keep it shut and deal with it. There's always going to be an asshole.
And especially because disruptive gameplay for you might be beneficial to, your faction, like your example on like a PvP server. Like I have an interesting story from, way back in the day when we raided, where there was a time we all didn't travel to a world boss together. Our main tank actually got kidnapped through mind controls, fears, polymorphs, and we couldn't get him to the world boss because an enemy raid had kind of captured him. And we couldn't fight that world boss because we didn't have our tank. And they were able to actually get him first because of it. And that's so is that griefing? That is, right? He couldn't control his character for an extended period of time. We're talking like an hour. And he couldn't log out. He could Alt F4, but as soon as he came back in, he was in the same spot they're waiting. And because of that, we learned basically, you know what? We can solve this because no GM was going to help. We all need to move together, right? It made everybody work together. There are solutions for a lot of these things that people can do. You just have to be smart enough and creative enough to figure them out. And I think maybe that was lacking a little bit yesterday because there were solutions they could have done to avoid this. They didn't use them. So that's what happens.
Yeah. I agree completely on that last point. I think the verbiage that's there in the TOS is covering enough that it gives Blizzard the ability to take action in something like this if they so chose to enforce it. I don't think it necessarily means that they're going to follow that to the letter because it's kind of a judgment call. But it's like if you're ganking somebody's lobby and just corpse camping them for hours on end, yeah, you're griefing them and you're really harassing them. But on a PvP server, all that person has to do is call out for help from their faction. And all of a sudden you've got organic PvP started over that. And you can often have some of the best moments you'll ever have in World of Warcraft in those types of PvP battles that start by somebody just being bored and corpse camping somebody. You have stuff like back in the day when a certain people organized a funeral in Winterspring and a guild decided to come crash it. And you end up with one of the most memorable moments in vanilla World of Warcraft, in my opinion. I think that the onus should be on the community, and in this case, the tournament organizers, to figure out the solutions and figure it out ahead of time and work around it. And I don't think it was griefing the tournament and it was disrupting their gameplay, but they had a way to get away from it and respond to it. And instead of basically asking for this person to be banned or moved away, I think that the people involved could have done something about it instead. And I think that's what we should be looking to do as a community.
Well, in terms of, doing something about it, I guess the wrinkle here that we haven't really dived into too much yet, and appreciating that it, as you say, it will be different in Classic because this is the beta. It's a rather unique circumstance, and also with the level cap and everything. But this is same faction griefing, which creates its own problems in and of itself. So, Ayle, you talked about how, there is a benefit, if there's a benefit for your faction, then how could it be termed as griefing or harassment? It's playing within the spirit of the game. Well, in this particular instance, there is no benefit for this person in terms of his faction. He's just there as the same member of that faction going to, fuck with this event. And I guess, at what point do we also start to draw a line where if you're going to ban this person, then... Well, sorry, I should be arguing against that point, but I was just going to say, if you're going to ban this point, then, at what stage does it get to? A streamer doesn't like it when someone's following him around or jumping all over his character as a same member of the faction, and they're just like, it's just, I can't see my character anymore, it's pissing me off, ban them. But, I mean, again, because I'm arguing for this side of the coin, absolutely you should be able to ban them. If they are, going up and down and blocking your view, and we talk about hours at a time, then it's far from a small infraction in terms of that user's enjoyment of the game. But Shlapshtick, how about you? Do you have anything to add to that?
See, I'm pretty sure Serenity Now, which is the guild that bombed that funeral back in Vanilla, I think they did get banned for that. I'm not saying necessarily that they should have, but I think they did. And so the precedent has been set. Like, you can ban people for griefing. It has happened lots of times.
I've heard conflicting things on that one. I've heard people saying they remember them getting banned, and I heard people say, no, nothing was done. So I'm really not sure.
Oh, really? Okay. As far as same faction griefing goes, it's like I said before, it's unavoidable. Like you can't, it's a slippery slope if you start banning people for it, because, it's never going to go away anyways. So to decide where the arbitrary line is it's an exercise in futility.
Let me open with this one for another can of worms in terms of streamers holding these events, and perhaps if it gets to a point where they're expecting Blizzard to start policing their events. Now, whether or not Blizzard was let's say this, how much Blizzard was involved in this one, I don't know. There's been insinuations that Blizzard might have either fronted the money for this one or, just been involved in sort of GMing it and policing it the whole time, and obviously sitting there on stream and watching it and making sure it all went okay. I don't know. I don't want to make any suggestion either way forcefully. But in terms of streamers saying, this is us marketing your product, we need your help in making sure this goes off without a hitch. How do you guys feel about that kind of treatment coming the way of the way the game is shown online to the masses?
I said this earlier. I don't think I necessarily have a problem if Blizzard wants to get involved in this sort of way. I think for something like a duel tournament, if you want to keep it away, there are closed off areas of the games that a GM could port all the participants to if you wanted to keep it completely grief free. And I don't have a problem with Blizzard getting into that role where you're not banning anybody because they're simply unable to grief in the first place. And I don't think I have a problem with that. Regardless of whether it's a streamer who's hosting the event or some other community member who's not a streamer, I think those types of events are good for the game. And certainly having streamers in this era makes this a lot more visible.
But how do you feel about the potential preferential treatment? So this only happened because there was a lot of people watching it. What happens if there's a smaller event, and it was being griefed in the same way, and it doesn't get the same amount of eyes, so nothing would really happen? Like that's kind of why I'm against it as well, is because it's a slippery slope. Like, they only did this because it was affecting many people, right? So if I were to host an event this week and it has much less eyes and it's being griefed, the expectation is there that they would do something, and if they didn't, then it becomes kind of a it's an unfair thing now that they've set.
I guess in my mind, I'm thinking of it's more of a thing that you've kind of set up with Blizzard ahead of time. So you've organized it with the GMs. You said these are the people involved, and it's handled ahead of time. And it just kind of is the way it is. You might not get that same clout if you're not a streamer. And that's kind of just the way it is, unfortunately.
Well, let's say hypothetically that you're a big streamer, you set up a big event with Blizzard ahead of time, but Blizzard doesn't transport you to another area. They go, yep, cool, you have our blessing, you go knock yourself out with your big dueling tournament in a contested zone at level 60 or whatever you might do, and then the opposite faction puts together a huge raid and goes forth to wipe you out, and then the complaints start. Do you think... I think that would be in the spirit of the game, would it not?
Absolutely. I would think it would be in the spirit of the game. Then you have this awesome large PvP battle.
Okay, so...
It does ruin the tournament, but...
Well, that's the thing.
You've got a whole other streamable event instead.
I guess this is the point in terms of where do we draw the line? And Rue, I'll ask you this one, because we're drawing the line at one person jumping around, not attacking anyone and just getting in the way, whereas we're all fine with 80 people or whatever it might be, a 40-man raid, let's say, converging on this tournament and just going, not today, buddy. You guys are not having this tournament that you planned in advance. You are on a PvP server. We will wipe you the fuck out. So the same argument might be ban them. But it's like, whoa. Now all of a sudden we've changed the rules.
Yeah, no, I don't think you draw. I think the line is not there. I don't think you ban either. I think the only way someone should be banned is if it becomes something where they're literally like threatening someone, or, in the realm of hate speech, or something that is outside of the World of Warcraft, that is attacking you in real life, if you will. That's where I think the line gets drawn. If it's something where someone, feels threatened, or where you're threatening the security of their account, their person, their social media, their anything like that, that's where I think the line is. But as far as in-game harassment, like killing you or blocking the tournament, I don't think there is a line. I think you just let it be, because that's part of the fun of it in a way. Because, during the big tournament, we were all on the other side of the coin, where it wasn't fun for us. It was just a night, when this comes out and it's no longer the beta and we all get to play together, I don't know that I won't be like, yeah, guys, let's go mess up that PvP tournament. I can't, say without a shadow of a doubt, I'm not going to want to do that at some point.
Guys, I'll get everyone to give me your final comments on what Ruse just said and what I've said. I've got to wrap it up for work, unfortunately. I wish I had more time for this one. But just final thoughts. And if I sort of just again said, I've probably done a pretty shitty job of arguing for the other side, I do apologize. And this call is going to ruffle some feathers. I do understand that, guys. But please understand it's all in the spirit of sort of mature debate. But, again, guys, final points on what Ruse just said. Do you agree with there's got to be some kind of leeway in the wording and the dealing with it in terms of once we convert to large-scale world PvP?
Yeah, I think you got to leave it up to the community to police it and set it up, or set up things such that they can deal with griefing in as many ways as possible. And I think there's a line somewhere where there's just absolutely egregious griefing. I don't know where that is. So I think trying to set that line is kind of foolish. And I think, like Rue said, most of that's probably going to be related to not really in-game stuff anyway.
Yeah, I like where Rue draws the line, where when it comes to harassment of, your person or things like that, that is where it should be drawn. Other than that, I feel like let the game be a sandbox, let whatever happens in there happen. People are smart, and it actually creates really interesting and fun, divergent gameplay that you just can't get anywhere else if there's not that intervention. So, let the wild things roam free.
Yeah, for sure. That's what MMOs are about. Go out, have fun, and, try to brush off the griefers, because they're going to be there.
All right, guys, thanks so much for taking part in this call. I've got to wrap it up now because I've got to run to work. But look, if anyone heard this call and you are absolutely incensed by anything that we've said, as I said, a lot of us were on the same kind of company line here, and I tried my best, but I probably didn't do a very good job. I apologize for that. But, I do agree with many of the opinions that you've just heard on this call. But if you disagree, let me know. I'm more than happy to get the other side of the coin heard on the show. So please don't be shy in PMing me on Discord and letting me know. Everyone, let me say thank you so much. Ayle, as always, you're a legend. Thanks for being here, man.
Thank you so much.
And Corazu, first time. I hope it was all good.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
And Rue, it was so good to finally talk to you on the show after we've messaged a couple of times.
Good to talk to you, Josh.
And Shlapshtick, thanks, mate, for stopping by.
Thanks. See you all in Azeroth.
See you later. This week on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, we cover 1992's Basic Instinct.
She pointed out a very interesting point from the first sex scene that leads into the crime scene.
Okay.
The killer
is
riding Johnny's knees in a very strange position.
I have one question to ask you. How do you do it?
It's the weirdest thing.
How
Are you
else
saying
does one do
that
it?
she's a little low on the saddle?
When she's, either Johnny has about a 3 foot long, which I've seen, and it's not, but it was just an odd position, but yeah.
If you'd like to hear more from the Cinephiles, then please do log on to cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. Or search for the Cinephiles on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But now, let's get back to Countdown. All right, it's time for another countdown to classic call and an Australian themed call. Once again, I'm so happy to be joined by two great Australians, some of the greatest Australians you might even put forth. So welcome back, as always, to a guy who's now got a couple of appearances under his belt. Lokth, how are you?
It's great to be back once again. Thanks for having me, Josh.
It's great to have you here. And another returner. It's been a long time between drinks, mate. Sanctus, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. It's always good to be.
Always a pleasure to have you guys back. And some of you may remember Sanctus from his call all about Scarab Lords some time ago. He was a Scarab Lord back in Vanilla. And some of you might remember Lokth from his appearances about Hunters. So, and other things, of course, as well. Now, guys, this one is a call about the beta. I think it would be remiss of the show not to mention the beta somewhat regularly, given what's going on, given all that's been discovered as we delve more and more into what we have been given from Blizzard. So I'll give you guys a little bit of an update on where I'm at with my gameplay. And more importantly, you two fine gentlemen are getting heavily involved in the beta as well. And Sanctus, you actually approached me and said, you know what? I think now that we've spent a fair bit of time with it, being, a couple of weeks, a few weeks, we can probably start to sit back and compare this version that we have now, being classic or the classic beta, versus the vanilla days versus private servers. And I think, this is something that will obviously evolve over time, but sure, it's a great time to get started. So Sanctus, I'll let you kick it off, mate. What have you noticed already in the beta that feels either the same or different from private servers and vanilla?
All right. So I guess there's no real clear-cut way to explain how the beta feels. So my initial impressions are that it's quite crisp. It feels like a great game. Despite a lot of the bugs and things people are reporting, it's still outrageously fun. But I want it to be clear and say that this is classic. It's not vanilla. It's kind of like it's a remake. So for people who are expecting the exact same feels as vanilla, it's not going to be that, but it's pretty damn close.
I completely agree with you there. And I think the show hasn't outright come and said it or commented on this very point that you've just raised, but you see it out there on the forums all the time. You see it mentioned in YouTube videos all the time, all over the subreddit. And I think it's a great point just to sort of really stamp is that classic is classic. Classic is not vanilla. Vanilla is not classic. Private servers are not vanilla or classic. They're these three completely different, very, very easily distinguishable things. So that's a good start. Now, we're entering the classic era and things are going to be a little bit different as much as we are trying to be, as authentic as we can in terms of what we're being given from Blizzard. Well, that's what Blizzard's told us. They're going to be as authentic as they can. So, I've played all of them. I've played vanilla. I've played private servers. I've now played the beta. And I've noticed a few things already. You guys have played a shitload more of all three of those things than me. So I'm so glad you're here to back up what I'm going to say. But Lokth, I'll turn to you and I'll say that already, before we get into sort of the real finicky details, as Sanctus said, there's still things being worked out. Here we are in week 3 or whatever of the beta. And you're a hunter. One of the big things was the auto shot madness that was happening, the bug that was absolutely breaking auto shot. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that. And that's obviously been fixed up since. I haven't dived into great detail with some of these bugs because they're getting fixed up as time progresses. So it's no point doing like a massive call. I feel like even on the Shaman Wind Fury thing, like, oh my God, Wind Fury's broken. Classic is DOA. Like, no, we're in a beta. They're fixing things as we go along, and they fix the Wind Fury thing as well. So, Lokth, I'll just get you to start. What have you noticed already that's different, that might be about to get fixed, or that you think is there for the long term?
It really depends what you're asking, different from what. I've noticed a ton of differences between vanilla and the private service. And as you said, there's been plenty of bugs. Like the Hunter auto shot bug, that was a fun Whaling's Cavern run I was running when that occurred. For those who don't know, basically auto shot basically just kind of froze and you could no longer auto shot. The main DPS output of a hunter, I could only do special shots. So from that point onwards in the run, I would do a special shot, so multi-shot, run in and whack the enemies with my giant two-handed axe. because there was nothing else I could do. Apparently, the bug itself wasn't auto-shot, but it was something to do with quivers. And if you unequipped your hunter's quiver and put all the arrows in your standard backpack, it would work perfectly fine. And that bug was there for about 2-3 days. There's pet bugs, which if you place your pet on passive, they just randomly decide that they don't want to attack the thing you told them to attack anymore. And nothing you can do will make them want to attack it anymore without changing their actual stance, which has resulted in several deaths because there's nothing quite like your pet deciding it doesn't want to aggro that mob that's wailing on you. So quite a few differences just in the bugs. But one of the big things I've noticed is the game feels, at least from a private server's perspective, in some parts it feels harder, but in a lot of parts it feels a lot easier. Like mobs tend to die, I feel, a bit quicker, especially in those early levels as a hunter. 0 to 10 as a hunter is considered some of the harder parts of leveling a hunter, and I found on private servers it was a bit more difficult than it has been on classic.
Yeah, I'll back you up on the difficulty there from what I've experienced so far. Now, all I can say is, you guys know I'm a pretty freaking average player. Lokth, you've seen me on screen, on stream. I'm a very average player, but I always keep sort of saying on stream, look, it is harder to play on stream when you're engaging with chat, likely excuse, Josh, blah, blah, blah. But when I'm off stream and I'm really able to concentrate, I have found that, yeah, I'm not dying as often as I remember back in the vanilla days through the leveling process. And I really do put that down to, honestly, more just experience and kind of being a bit more around what's happening in the game. Like sort of I know what to do or what I should be doing in certain situations. And I think just a lot of players are going to find that generic MMO experience is going to save your ass more times than not. When back in the day, some of us were playing our first MMOs with vanilla World of Warcraft, not really knowing when to hit your oh shit buttons and things like that, or just not knowing when to heal or whatever it might be. I'm finding a little bit easier that way, but that's not the game's fault in my mind. I know some people have commented on the mob tuning and whether or not, what's going on there, and Blizzard saying, hey man, look, everything's as it should be. And that might well be the case and we're just better players. But Sanctus, I'll turn back to you and sort of ask, maybe, you've talked about your experience on vanilla, and obviously you are quite an accomplished player back in the day with your Scarab Lord title and everything. If I push you for a bit more information on some of the things that you've seen in the beta that either remind you of vanilla or make you think, fuck, this is different, does anything spring to mind?
All right. Look, I just wanted to comment and say, while there are multiple differences across, vanilla, private servers and classic beta, the leveling process still feels the same. So if you're going to level from 1 to 30, the overall experience still feels the same across all three games. And, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it's easier in classic or it's harder in some parts, but a lot of that is just based off feeling. And I haven't actually seen any evidence to state that, certain mobs hit harder, this and that. It's all kind of anecdotal at this point. In terms of
going around where someone actually used Hunter's Beast Law on beasts around the world and actually compared private server values to the values in Classic.
Okay, well, I haven't seen that post.
I'll see if I can find it for you.
I also wanted to, so one thing I noticed which annoyed me on private servers, on the most recent private server I played on, the roof at the Gromgol base camp, when you jump down from the Zep, it was like you could fall through it on the private server, but it seems like in the classic beta it's become solid again. So, little things like that is, I guess, what I noticed. They don't necessarily break the game, but just things that I remember.
All right. Now, Lokth, while you're looking that up, I'll just say that if we now sort of turn our minds to, like you said, to private servers as well, I can, you guys know me, I'm not going to be the guy who's going to be able to compare everything numbers wise, but I can comment on the look and feel. And I've noticed this much already, and a lot of people playing the beta may be thinking the same thing. And that's along the lines of regulation. Like, it has been a welcome blessing to wade back into the waters of a game that is going to be, policed, if you will, regulated. I'm looking at world chat, I'm looking at general trade, whatever it might be, and people aren't being fuckwits. And it's a really nice change for a time. Now, not to say that private server chat at all times was just the worst. It wasn't. That would be an extremely hyperbolic statement to make. But there were plenty of times where I'd be wandering around and see stuff in chat that just makes me go like, oh, fucking hell, are you serious? Like, it was odd. It was just, the wild, wild west in terms of say whatever the fuck you want and just, that's it. But, walking around where people now know I kind of have to be not necessarily friendly, but at least I can't just say whatever the fuck I want to be offensive and a bit of an edgelord. It's really nice to get back to that's what I remember from vanilla. Relatively pleasant chat, bit of snarkiness, bit of fucking around with people, but nothing that ever crosses the line. And it's just been nice. Lokth, have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, I've noticed, the Barons, it has a bit of a reputation for being a bit trolly and so forth, but I found my experience in the Barons on Classic has been far nicer, overall when I randomly decide to read chat. Tend to read chat on a private server and, at least half an hour someone, tries to be outrageously offensive, while it seems to be more chat about Warcraft itself inside of the beta at the moment. And I think that's just very much because that's what the community is focused on. They're focused on, what is this game? What is happening in this game? And, how much do we love said game?
Well said, well said. And I mean, just to come back to as well, the look of the game and Sanctus, I'll turn to you for this one. Graphically, this is again where the different eras come into it. And, I've plodded along to level 27 now. Yes, I know I'm not level 30 yet. I didn't have there was about 6 days where I didn't get to play the beta and people will be killing themselves going, oh, they gave access to this guy who's not even playing the game. I promise you I'm trying, but I'm level 27 now. And it just looks so crisp. And I think, Lokth, you admonished me the other day for having my water settings turned to ultra high with the new glossy water. And I actually must thank you for making me turn it back to the old school water. I think I was a bit 50-50 on that one, but I now much prefer the old school look. So I'm glad I've changed that. I'll stick with that. But it just looks crisper. And also, even though I'm still playing with about, 200 lag because the server's in North America, and, private servers was about 250, 300 lag, maybe 350 at the bad times, but it's not that much difference in lag, but for some reason it just feels smoother. I don't mind the lag. As a caster, it doesn't really bother me. It's fine. But I tell you what, it looks gorgeous and I feel like I'm playing it in a more modern era. Sanctus, have you felt that at all?
Yep, totally agree. So yeah, crisp was what I used to describe the game at the start. I think I'm walking through the water right now and there's little ripples that are forming. It just feels really cool. And what I like about it is it's refreshed, but I still feel like the core gameplay aspects are kept intact, which was what was really important to a lot of.
Now, sorry, I must make a correction. Yes, I'm getting reminded in Twitch chat, Lokth, that wasn't you. You should have corrected me, you sly son of a bitch. That was Auntie who reminded me about the water, not you. You were going to take the credit.
Once again, you're getting your favourite two Australians mixed up.
Absolutely. Now, guys, I'll just throw it open to both of you. Just real quick before we move on to more things. Any other bugs we haven't mentioned that you've come across?
Oh, there's one thing that's a bit different. So when you're resetting an instance on Classic Beta, you kind of have to /camp out and I think wait 3 to 4 minutes before you get ported to the front. Whereas on a private server, it was instant and it would drop you from the group. But it seems like on Classic, it doesn't drop you from the group. You just have to wait.
Lokth?
Only more minor hunter things, most of which have been fixed. Blizzard's been very, very active in the stage. It's, bug gets discovered and honestly, I guess it comes down to the complexity of said bug, but they tend to, disappear as quickly as you find them. One of the early hunter ones I had running around was if you were attacking something at range and then you set a raptor strike up, instead of actually doing the raptor strike when that mob came into range, it would just sit there waiting for you to actually auto attack that mob before the raptor strike would occur. While in classic, while in vanilla or private servers, hitting raptor strike would just, instantly hit the mob as soon as it was in range and you'd start auto attacking on it. So just slight differences, and Blizzard, seems to have a list going. They're going through that list. They're checking it twice. They're trying to make sure that all those bugs aren't being naughty on us.
Fair enough. Now, guys, I'll again open this one up to both of you, but now that we kind of covered off on the bugs and whatnot, I just want to give a bit more of a story about what I've been doing, and then I want you guys to sort of let me know if you've done any of the same or what your adventures have been like in the beta, where you've been, what quests you've enjoyed, and things like that. But guys, last time I checked in with you, I said, yeah, I'd run a few dungeons. I'd done Wailing Caverns. I'd done an RFC, obviously, all that does. Now I've done a couple of BFDs. What the fuck am I talking about? Ran through Black Fathom Deeps, got the amazing wand, that is fucking that blue that you get that is just kick ass. I'm forgetting the name of it now. It's escaping me. One of you guys might help me out at some stage, but it's, been a game changer for me in the, old DPS game. But the other thing that happened was I got involved in my first ever massive world PvP event. And, I saw the call go out in guild chat. Hey, need help. Hillsbrad, who's available? I'm level 27. I know I'm 3 levels off. I know I'm going to get my ass kicked, but I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm taking this opportunity while I can. Went over there with the guild. It was a lot of fun is all I can say. I was tentative, but I eventually threw myself into it. It was about 20 on 20, I want to say. And just the back and forth, like the Taran Mill South Shore thing. We started out kicking their ass, then they kicked our ass, then we kicked their ass again, and just the pushing back and forth. And I died a bunch of times because obviously I wasn't taking very good tabs of when, as a priest, I was trying to heal people, and then I would not notice that the whole raid had started pushing back. They're like, fall back. And I didn't get the message, and I'm there on the front lines all of a sudden go, oh yeah, I'm going to get fucking ganked now. And that's how it would go. But I snuck in a few kills and I started feeling happy, and I did that for about an hour, and I can't wait to do more of it. You accomplish nothing in that hour over, getting a few honor points. I didn't get that many, but it just felt great. Have you guys done anything in terms of world PvP yet like that?
World PvP, not so much, outside of the classic. I see someone red over in the distance and I go fight him, most of the time losing because they tend to have more gear than me at the moment. But, every time I see someone worth killing, I attempt to do so. The most world PvP I've had come up against me in like a group setting is me and another hunter were doing a quest, and we just happened to run into a streamer and his group, who then proceeded to destroy us, and then he spat on me. So he shall remain nameless, but curse that man.
Oh, yeah, that's a bit rude. Rightio. Sanctus, how about you?
Well, yeah, I had a few fun experiences. So I started going for the arena chest, and on my first try, I think I was the only one there, so I just snagged it. That's, I suppose, a benefit of playing in Oceanic. But then I went 3 hours later, and then there was a Horde Shaman there. So we kind of jeweled it out 10 minutes before the chest, and I think one of us died. I can't remember who. But anyway, then a bunch of Alliance showed up. I think it was about 5 Night Elf Hunters. So me and this Shaman grouped up, and we hid behind one of the columns. And then these Hunters jumped in the arena and then started killing each other. And then when there was 2 left, me and the Shaman jumped in, and I started looting the chest after killing one. And then one of the other hunters rezzed, and he took a shot at me, but I dodged it while I was looting the chest so it didn't interrupt me, and then I got everything. It was pretty cool.
Very nice.
I guess a lot of what I've been doing after hitting 30 as a rogue is mainly just running dungeons and min-maxing my gear. It's been really interesting because of the level cap, it's kind of made its own meta.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's the most interesting part of beta is that hunt for best in slot level 30.
And I really wish more people got in the beta because, I think sometimes the server does feel a bit dead, especially around this time.
It also has brought up some very interesting challenges. Like a lot of the best gear is indeed from dungeons, but then some of the actual best gear is from quests that you can get at level 30, but have requirements that we'd normally not be able to achieve until well into your 40s, like the Warrior Whirlwind Axe.
The Whirlwind Axe, yeah. The other thing, I mean, like you say, Lokth, the thing that I've been loving is, even though I'm not there yet, I'm soon to be, and I'd be interested to see what you guys plan on doing. But, you know, I'm 3 levels away from 30. I do plan on probably speccing a little bit more towards PvP, funnily enough, and starting to run some Warsong Gulches and doing some more world PvP. If they keep that cap at 30 for, I don't know, a couple of more weeks, whatever they do, I don't know if they are going to extend it. You know, the rumors are that they are, but let's say they keep it at 30 for a little bit longer. We're seeing a lot of people, like Sanctus said, and Lokth, you backed him up, going, this new meta, and seeing people scramble for talents, going like, where do I put everything at 30? I've never even considered this. And outside of BIS lists, just going to their talent points, going like, fuck, what's a great PvP spec for 30?
It really comes down to class. Like Hunter, for example, you can pretty much get everything you really need to be pretty strong in PvP for a standard hunter kit. Enhancement shamans are insanely strong. They pretty much have everything they need by 30. While other classes, you know, I think rogues in preparation, you know, actually have some major decisions because they can't get everything they normally have in a PvP situation.
Sanctus, what have you been thinking for your 30 spec? Have you been toying around with a few things, or are you pretty set?
Once I got some gear from running dungeons and that, I pretty much went into a PvP spec for ganking because I like to do some world PvP. It hasn't been so effective in battlegrounds, and from what I've seen, most rogues aren't really doing too well at level 30 in the battlegrounds. It's mainly the hybrid classes like druids, shamans, paladins, as well as ranged DPS, warlocks, hunters that are dominating.
So basically everyone but rogues.
Yeah, basically. It could just be me, though.
It's interesting. Like I've really been enjoying watching the PvP, and like I said, I'm not a big PvP person myself, but you know, I plan on doing it once I get to cap. And you know, I'd be interested to know, Sanctus, you said world PvP is probably something that's been working out a little bit better for you as a rogue. Where have you been going to hang out and find people?
Mostly around Hillsbrad, because I like to farm the herbs around there. You know, if I see someone level 28, 29, yeah, just cheap shot, backstab, you know, Thistle Tea, a few more backstabs in there and just run away.
Yeah. Are you Alliance or Horde?
Horde.
Oh, okay, good. Then it wasn't you that got me the other night. God, I said some choice words on stream the other night when a level 30 took me down when I was running around Hillsbrad.
There's a lot of pent-up rage in that moment.
There sure was.
It's actually crazy, though, how geared some of the level 30s are. Like, almost every level 30 character that I inspect has, like, amazing gear. And everyone I've PvP'd in the world has taken it really seriously. Like, they take health pots, they use bandages, they use engineering consumables. You know, it's all out. It's pretty.
Oh, it's people go to great lengths to succeed in, you know, this particular beta. I've noticed as well. I mean, they do it on private servers too, but with the sort of finite window that we've got of 1 to 30, there's only so much you can do. With everyone sort of very focused on what, as you say, what pots will get you to produce the most output, and not having to go to all lengths of the world to get them because you just capped at 30. There's only so many places you can go and you've only got so much gold or whatever. It's been really fun watching these people who will go that extra mile. And like you say, like, you know, I was mentioning a couple of weeks ago that Swift Thistle was selling really well, not so much anymore. I made my money and got out of that market. But all the rogues were buying Swift Thistle because they're just chugging that tea and just enjoying the world PvP or the battlegrounds. So it's been really good fun. But as you guys say, look, it's a new meta, it's new times, it's classic, it's not vanilla. The beta is still going strong. They opened up the gates. I think they let in a few more people today or yesterday. Do you guys hear about that?
I have heard about it, but I've been at work all day, so I have no idea if it was true or not.
Didn't hear about that.
Well, I mean, I heard a rumor. Apparently, more people were getting in today. I got a message from a listener saying, "Hey, I got in," and I'm like, "That's fantastic." It was Sonosuke actually who got in. I think it's more friends and family who are getting in. So I hope more and more of that happens. You know, and we can hear from more people who are having a good time and discover more bugs and make Classic as good as it can be. But anyway, guys, before we go, does anyone have any final points about this? Just little things we've noticed between private servers, vanilla and classic, or are we good with what we've said?
I'll bring back up that I'm just really enjoying doing those crazy quests at level 30. as a hunter, best in stock gear comes from the best in stock weapon comes from doing the Stranglethorn hunt. So I spent probably about 6 hours trying to solo that before finally finding another hunter doing the same thing. And we managed to 2-man level 43 elite, which was quite fun. After doing a massive series of quests. And I think that's the main difference at the moment is, and I'd say bigger difference from retail than anything else is the fact that the community is out there in the world doing these crazy things. And it's just a whole lot of fun.
Sanctus?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment and say, guys, this is an amazing game. I'm super hyped for it. It's not the same as vanilla WoW. It's World of Warcraft Classic. It's something new. But the overall experience and that feel is intact. And when this comes out, like, it's going to go.
Yep, completely agree. I'm very happy as well, guys. You know, it's still all thumbs up, and every person I've seen leaving some kind of review, if you will, around the place has been saying the same thing. If you're not in the beta, you absolutely have something to look forward to when the release comes. So everything's been really positive, and it's been great to see. There's been nothing game breaking. I think that people are really going, oh no, what's going on? It's all good, and we'll keep updating you on how we're all going in the beta. Now, guys, I just want to say thank you so much again for doing this. Sanctus, so good to have you back.
Yeah, cheers. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And Lokth, you crazy bastard. As always, it's a pleasure.
It's been fun. I look forward to leveling a Alliance Rogue now just to gank you.
Oh, yeah, I look forward to it. I'll say even worse things than what I did to that other guy the other night. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Hi, everyone. Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic, and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and we have got a boatload of people involved in this one, and we've got some very big brains here to discuss a topic that, funnily enough, on first look from a scrub like me, I wouldn't have thought was really a big deal, but there's actually a fair bit to this one, and that was the blue post that we got just a few days ago about hit caps and whatnot that sparked quite a bit of discussion over at the WoW Classic subreddit and also at the official forum. So we've got a bunch of people here to talk about this one, and I just want to introduce everyone one by one. Nanook, how are you?
Hey, what's going on?
Not much, man. Good to have you here. Saturnalia, our GM of the Countdown to Classic Horde Guild. NA, how are you, mate?
Pretty good. How you doing, Josh?
Doing well, mate. It's good to get people to hear that voice. And Skarm, how's things, man?
I'm good. How's it going?
Good, good. And Steppenwolf, the manager, I guess, the owner, if you will, or the admin of the Warrior Discord. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, man.
And Vilius, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Happy to have you all here. Okay, guys, now look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with you, Vilius, because you let me know that you're the person who actually put up this really, really in-depth, intricate post that was so well put together that actually got Blizzard to respond to it over at the official forum. So why don't you tell people a little bit about what your intention was with that post and what you were trying to find out?
Yeah, so it's always nice to get a blue response, of course, but I was just lucky enough to get into the beta, and theorycrafting is kind of what I do, so I was anxious to test a bunch of stuff, especially with warriors. And we started noticing as we did these tests that there were some big differences in how private server mechanics had worked. So we put a lot of that up into a GitHub that Meiji from the Warrior Discord set up, and so we could sort of correlate different tests together. And we posted a lot of our findings on that blue post. And then even since then, we've continued to discover things that are different, which we haven't posted on the blue post or on that forum post. So I'm happy to go through those. But essentially what Blizzard is saying is that what we're seeing is not bugs, but it's the intended behavior of Classic.
Okay, well, why don't you point out the specifics that you raised in that post, and then we'll get to what the response was.
Yeah, so one of the big ones was for +3 mobs, like raid bosses and other mobs that are 3 levels higher. You have a melee and presumably ranged crit suppression, so you basically have a 3% crit lower than you otherwise would. You have a 14% parry chance base against +3 mobs, about 1.5% higher dodge chance than on private servers, a little bit lower block chance. Some of the glance mechanics are slightly different than they were on private servers. You get a little bit less hit benefit from +5 weapon skill, but that's balanced out with a lower hit cap for single weapon and yellow hits. And then just this morning, we discovered that parry haste for players is a little bit less aggressive than it was modeled on Elysium and other private servers. So that's the brand new hot off the press information.
Okay, so, well, that's something I'd want to quickly ask you about before we turn to obviously the others on the call, just while we focus in on this post that spawned everything. You mentioned private servers, and, you know, even though a lot of the posters were sort of saying in regards to Blizzard's reply, oh, well, you know, this confirms what we already knew this. And I guess I'd ask you, what did we know and what didn't we know? How confident were we in the private server data? And if the data was just guesswork that happened to turn out right on the private server end, what was it based off of?
So, you know, you're probably familiar with Elitist Jerks, which is, you know, one of the famous theory crafting sites. But, you know, I was active on there back in the day, but they didn't really get going hardcore until like TBC era. So the vanilla testing just wasn't up to the same standard as, you know, TBC and Wrath and later. So it's really hard to find really good references for mechanics and proc rates and things like that in vanilla days. You know, you've probably seen old YouTube videos. Some of those videos are so bad you can't even read the numbers on the screen. So it's very difficult to get reliable vanilla information. And personally, I think the private servers did an excellent job modeling as best they could what vanilla was really like. They didn't get everything right, you know, and even that list I read sounds like a lot of stuff, but, you know, 95% of the stuff mechanics wise, they really did get right. And they deserve a lot of credit for that. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty with proc rates, especially because that's pretty hard to test. And, you know, we're not going to know what those values are until deeper into the beta or even live. So there's definitely going to be more changes to discuss, but what we've already discovered is going to have some impact on the meta.
All right. Well, Saturnalia, I'll turn to you and just sort of figure out, you know, as we said, eventually Blizzard did reply to Vilius's fantastic post there. You know, they thanked him firstly for putting it together so well. And then later on they got back and said, well, you know, here's some data, here's some testing we've done, and here's our results. And what I'd ask you to do, Saturnalia, and anyone piggyback off of Saturnalia's answer if anything's missed out or if we need to flesh things out a little bit more, I'll just let you guys know. Obviously, you know, a lot of this stuff somewhat flies over my head. Like, I can understand it at a base level, but you guys, you know, will be able to go much, much deeper with some of the information that is given to us here. If I asked you, Saturnalia, explain this to me like I'm a 2-year-old, what did Blizzard tell us in response?
So basically what they told us is the biggest thing is just the increased parry chance against bosses. It's about 3 times as much as how it was on private servers and model. And like, it affects DPS, but not nearly as much as it doesn't affect DPS nearly as much as it does tanks, because, you know, you don't get parried when you're hitting the backside of the boss, but there is a slight increase in dodge chance. I think it's 0.9%. But for the large part, DPS, I don't think for melee it's going to be super noticeable, but it's going to be noticeable on the threat generation that the tanks can do, especially on the pull in the first few seconds of an encounter, because those are very important moments in a fight to get that initial threat.
All right. And obviously Blizzard talked about, you know, number of testing they did in relation to the reference client and what's happening in the beta at the moment as well. And bringing up that point about threat and, you know, the initial pull. We'll get into all of that and, you know, what people obviously need to keep an eye on when that's all happening. But I should ask Blanket, are any of you guys involved in the beta?
Nope, I'm not just going to subscribe just for the beta.
Sorry, one person said they were. Who was that?
Vilius, yes.
Oh, Vilius, excellent, fantastic. Well, I'd ask you, sorry, just cut back to you and then we'll get to the other guys. Have you noticed anything in the beta initially pertaining to this information that, you know, checks out? Are you like, have you made any notes in pulling that you're like, oh, okay, that's like private servers, or it feels a little bit different to private servers, or it feels different to vanilla. So we've got this sort of, you know, vanilla versus private servers versus classic that we're constantly referencing between the three. What have you noticed with pulling so far?
I think overall, there are certain things that are getting a lot of attention, like, you know, elite damage and, you know, how easy or more difficult certain classes are to level compared to private servers. But, you know, what I'm more interested in is raid mechanics and stuff like that. There are certain things that we're not going to know for sure for a while, like boss armor values are supposed to be lower and varied compared to private server values. So that will certainly have an impact on melee and hunter DPS. But again, I think private servers, especially ones like Elysium, where I've had a chance to actually examine the source code, they match up incredibly well with most things. You know, we're sort of focusing on the few things that they got wrong, but they really got a lot of stuff right.
Yeah. And like one thing I want to say about that is that a lot of people, and I've heard this a lot, where they'll say, oh, so many things private servers got wrong. And then they'll start talking about like, oh, this level 10 mob should be casting fireball and he doesn't on private servers. Therefore, you know, private servers are wrong. And it's a silly comparison to make, I think, when it comes to almost everything before 60. Like, yeah, leveling might be a little different in classic than private servers, but the bulk of the content is rating. And that's what I think that the Lights Hope, like our private server at least, I think they have that pretty accurate within like 90% of what classes we can be like.
Like, even if the mechanics are wrong a bit, like the approximate difficulty is about the same. And since vanilla really isn't about difficulty, it doesn't really matter, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not going to be so different that people can't adapt. And
like the only difficulty in vanilla raids is coordinating 40 people and managing them. Like, that's the only difficulty. All the mechanics are really easy compared to retail.
Herding cats is what I call it.
Even people's memory of the difficulty is going to be different because we didn't have 1.12 talents or itemization back then for MC and Blackwing Lair, unless you were like really late to the game.
I mean, even Blizzard didn't know how to design their gear back then. How are we expected to know how to play the game, you know? So a lot of people, it was a new game, and a lot of people, myself included, it was our first MMO. So people in vanilla in general, even some of the best players, don't know nearly as much as we do today. Not to say they were bad back then, because they weren't. But if you've been playing any game for 15 years, new things are just going to come out all the time.
I'll just ask this one on a general level to, you know, first in, best dressed here, guys, as we'll clean up with the blue posts and then we'll move on to some sort of, you know, more in-depth stuff that you guys will be able to talk about in the theory crafting side of things. But from the information that we got, and as I said, you know, a lot of this wasn't a shock to many of you guys, but what was the biggest thing that you took away from this blue post is like, I'm glad that's finally just been said?
I'm glad that we just got a response that was so detailed. I mean, we didn't get block percentage on the mobs, but we got a lot of other stuff we can work with.
Yeah, it's really, they went out of their way to give us this post, and I appreciate it.
The classic team, like, may have like different parts of it, but like the people actually doing the development, the people who wrote this post, they do seem to know what they're talking about. And so it gives me a little higher trust level for them that they'll manage to make classic, like, well developed.
I agree with that.
For me, it's very satisfying to finally know like what the actual mischance and glancing blow formulas are, because I have done like hours and hours of research for private servers to figure out those formulas.
Sorry, just if you go a bit further into that, tell us about the research that you've done and how this information helps you with those, you know, mischances and glancing blows, and how that might change the way that you approach Classic, or, you know, confirm the way you're going to approach Classic.
The approach isn't going to change much. Like, the small differences in the formulas actually don't affect itemization that much. Like, but the biggest thing is that cleansing blow damage reduction will cap out at 308 weapon skill compared to 350 on private servers. But since getting 350 in like the benefit from that was really small anyways. It doesn't affect it much. Like, you still want to stay at around 310 weapon skill or something like that. But about the research, like, that's basically just like putting the filter on Google, like 2004, 2006, trying to find all bits of information about it. Watching, I don't know, old retail vanilla videos, like all stuff like that. It's there's so much different sources. Like, the best source I found for cleansing blows was from old wiki entries. Like, there was some guy who actually did decent testing, like he attacked level 61, 62, and 63 mobs like over 5,000 times or something like that, and then he got the cleansing blow damage reduction values. And I mean, those values were actually correct, but for the most part, but since it didn't test against level 60 mobs, we didn't know that it should cap out at 308, not 315.
Just to like open the curtain a little bit on what's going on behind the scenes. Like, there's people in the Discord, the Warrior Discord, who are like attacking mobs like 10,000 times or whatever, just to see what happens, like what the values are. People are really involved.
I've been able to catch up on a lot of Netflix shows just auto-attacking, +3 mobs in Barrens. So it's very labor-intensive work.
I can imagine. Well, guys, let's get into that a little bit because as, if people aren't aware, a lot of you mentioned that you're involved over there at the Warrior Discord, which, as we said off call, you've got pretty much the Warrior Discord and the Druid Discord are two of the more intensive theory crafting Discords going around. And you guys do such phenomenal work over there with the obviously, as you say, slapping a mob over the head 10,000 times to try and get some data, and then just the conversations that spawn from that. But, I might start with you, Nanook, and just sort of ask, when we talk about theory crafting and Malay theory crafting, perhaps more specifically in relation to this blue post, what kind of things have we not heard? Have you guys been talking about a lot over the last, year or two over there that you're dying to find out about?
A big one is the effect of Wind Fury, because private servers are not all created equal. Like, Wind Fury is one thing that's changed a lot over the course of like Nostalrius versus Elysium, etc. So we're just dying to have the level cap increased to 60 or at least 40 on the beta, so that can be tested. Vilius probably has a list of things he's waiting to test as well.
Yeah, we've got a list going on our GitHub in terms of things that still need testing, but personally, one of the things I'm most anxious to find out is boss armor values, because that's one of the biggest determining factors for melee and hunter meta, because if the boss armors are low enough that your debuffs like Sunder and Fair Fire and all those things can reduce the armor to 0, then, if you don't need stuff like Annihilator at that point, then you don't need to have anyone wielding that weapon for that extra armor debuff. So it's going to be very interesting to see what those specific values are.
The boss armor values, like, most of them are around 3,730 to 3,780 or something like that. That can be calculated from retail vanilla videos. For example, if a warrior uses Bloodthirst with and without Crusader, you can calculate it based on the damage difference.
And also something I heard about is that bosses might hit for less in Classic than they do currently on like Northdale Lightbringer. They might not hit as hard. And people have been saying already, like in the beta, that, we did Scarlet Monastery and the mobs didn't hit there as hard, but we don't have any level 60 content yet. So I don't really care about if SM mobs hit harder, not as hard on compared to private servers. It doesn't really matter. But as far as raids go, I really want to see how hard mobs and bosses and raids hit in Classic.
I will say, related to lower level mobs, it has been confirmed already that, and this is from a blue post, an earlier blue post that probably didn't get as much attention, where the devs went into Deadmines and they tested the damage of the elite mob on the test client, like the beta, and then they went back to their reference 1.12 client, and the damage was the same. And so it was a big difference that people were noticing from private servers, where elite mobs at lower levels at least were hitting for a lot less in the beta. So that's another argument for why Classic might be a little easier in the long run, but we haven't tested bosses yet, so in raids.
Mm-hmm.
For all you guys who aren't involved in the beta, have you been furiously studying footage and trying to figure out stuff from what you've seen and heard so far?
Yes.
And what,
Absolutely.
And what have you come up with?
I have been just making issues for others to test on beta if I can't test myself.
There's a beta tester role on the Discord as well.
Right now, I'm just I still raid weekly, so I'm just like practicing, keeping myself fresh, and not get rusty before classic hits. That's what I've been doing, and making YouTube videos.
It's a good idea.
And I just asked this one. Perhaps I'll start with you, Saturnalia, and just sort of say, in general, in terms of, again, warrior theory crafting, melee theory crafting, if there's something that you would highlight as one of the more misunderstood things about the way in which you guys go about your theory crafting business, whether it be with threats or whatnot, what would you say that would be?
One of the misunderstood points.
Well, I would say, just, I guess you could call this misunderstood, where say you post a video on YouTube of like a speed run from a private server, like an hour AQ40 or 25-minute BWL, for example, and people will automatically just completely discredit it. Not everybody, but you'll see people just say private server, who cares? I don't care. And not give any kind of appreciation to whether or not the numbers are accurate as far as classic goes or not. The fact is that like these runs took a ton of theory crafting, a ton of preparation, way longer than the raid. Like preparing for a 25-minute BWL takes a lot longer than 25 minutes. It takes like 10 times that amount or more.
It takes weeks of theory crafting and practicing.
Exactly. So a lot of people just dismiss that outright because it was done on a private server and not an official server, which I don't think people should be doing that.
I just reminded myself of a point that came up in the show's Discord as soon as this blue post came up. And Saturn, I'll get you to kick this one off because I think you were involved in that conversation. Now, explain to me why this information that we got via the blue post affects what might happen with, we talk about TPS and DPS, and some of the conversation that started up was, well, this changes the meta straight away, no more dual wielding tanks. And there was a bit of a back and forth on that going, well, maybe not. This doesn't really confirm much at all. Like we'll have to still see and how it all goes in classic. And I think, Saturn, you were saying that you had a few points on what this might do with TPS. Can you go into that a bit further?
Well, yeah. So basically the blue post is just saying that the boss has more avoidance when you're attacking from the front, which is mainly going to be the tank and the majority of. So, if you're not hitting the boss, you're not getting as much threat. Your shield slams are getting parried, your heroic strikes are getting parried, and then you're also getting hit more, which leads to more rage. But basically, it's just you got to work harder to get as much threat as you would on, say, Northdale or Lightbringer or another private server. And just because it's harder doesn't mean it invalidates those specs. It's just we're going to have to try to figure out what works the best when. The same thing that so many people have done up to this point, too. So it doesn't really change it. It's just, it's more like a challenge. And it's kind of fun to think about, well, how would I do it now that I have these different constraints, so to speak, or variables to play with?
One effect that it'll have is just like further increases the amount of theory crafting that we can do for classic. It's a 15-year-old game, but it's still amazing. Like every time we boot it up, that there's so much more to discover.
Yeah, well, for DPS, it isn't gonna change much. Like the only thing is you have 0.9% more dodge on the boss, so you will do about 1% less minus -3% crit, which doesn't matter if you're crit capped, but it will affect you a lot if you're not crit capped. So, but it can also affect DPS if the tank can't hold aggro due to the less threat per second is too.
Yes, like lower end guilds might struggle a little more.
Yeah, it's gonna affect hard a lot more than Alliance. Like Alliance shouldn't have, if the tank is good enough and if like Fury spec, they won't have threat problems due to Salvation, but on Horde, they might have to start using like Tranquility Totems instead of Wind Fury or switching between them. And the most hardcore Horde guilds are probably still going to be fine on aggro. Like the threat per second capability on Horde tanks is also insane due to Wind Fury.
I agree with that. And it also, what the increased parry chance does, it makes it so luck is a little bit more of a factor. It's only even now with like on a private server where bosses have like a 5% chance to parry and a 5% chance to dodge, there'll be times where you'll run into a boss, hit Bloodthirst, Heroic Strike, Sunder, and all three will get dodged or parried. It's rare, but it can happen. So in a case like that, there has to be just communication. Like the main tank will say, "Oh shit, all my abilities just missed. Chill out for a second." And maybe that communication will just happen 9% more now, really. So it's not anything that's going to really change how things are done, I don't think. And again, bosses might not hit it as hard. So
one
we don't
thing
even know
that
that
also happens due to the parry buff on bosses is there's a thing called parry haste, which means each time the boss parries, his swing speeds up. So the tanks will be taking more damage. It will be a bit more burn. Once again, like hardcore guilds will most likely handle it, because if the healer is like precasting big heals, you can't really kill the tank due to that. But casual guilds might struggle a lot more. And on some bosses, you might have to switch to shield instead of dual wielding, because some bosses just hit hard enough that you have to be careful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the skill cap or the skill entry level, whatever you want to call it, for Fury Prot dual tanking will rise a little bit, because you have to know when to put on a shield and when to take it off, and then when to put it back on, when to take it off. And I think that'll happen a little more often because of increased parry haste due to bosses. But as long as you know when to do it, you should be fine still.
So you're saying little Johnny come lately who may have been trying Classic for the first time ever, having never played WoW or anything like that, goes, "Oh, I've read all this stuff about, dual wield tanking. I'll give that a go," but it might not work out so well for them.
They shouldn't be doing that anyway. Even if bosses had a 5% chance to parry, like and I've made that pretty clear in my videos. I've never once said like, "Hey, hit 60 and then try dual wield tanking." I'm very careful when I advise people, like, "Hey, go deep prot first, get the feel of tanking." And if you don't even need to go Fury Prot if your raid DPS isn't high enough, really. If you're not having threat issues, then stay deep prot. But once you start having threat issues, and you can start transitioning into it, that's when you try it.
For like 90% of the kills, like protection tanks will be the way to go. Like it was like that on private servers, it will be like that on Classic. But the most hardcore guilds want to push everything to the limit. They will need Fury.
I agree.
Yeah, and if you are having like threat problems, you probably shouldn't be looking at your spec as the first thing. You should be looking at like how you're playing, and then look at what consumables you could use, and then look at gear.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Vilius, I might start with you for this one, because it sounds like a few of the guys are saying they're not expecting too much to change in terms of the way in which advanced guilds tear through the content. But one thing I'm wondering is, people were also talking about, speed runs and whatnot. And we've heard about some of the obscene times that some of these really, really skilled guilds have been ripping through the content on private servers. Now, is anything contained within this post or within footage of the beta or anything of that nature that you've seen or heard over the last couple of weeks that would make you think that won't be the case in Classic? Or do you think absolutely it's going to be exactly the same, or maybe they'll be challenged a little bit more with some of this data? Or what do you think?
I think speedruns will still be a thing, especially if boss armor values are lower and if the bosses do less damage. But I think, generally speaking, all of these changes, some of them could be considered nerfs compared to private servers. Some could be considered buffs, and there's still a lot we don't know. But for me, that's all good news, because as a 3-crafter, a changing meta is kind of our bread and butter. So I'm looking forward to updating my old simulation code to see what the combined effect of all these things is going to be for both TPS and DPS. I mean, we're sort of speculating on, this thing is going to have a big effect and this thing will have a small effect, but knowing the complete balance of all the effects, that's where the simulations come in. So, you're going to see more simulation tools and results coming out as we get closer to release, to show kind of what the current state of the meta is.
I did some testing on the spreadsheet already, putting in the new formulas. The actual formula changes affect DPS a little, like maximum. If you're at 305 weapon skill, it doesn't even affect it at all, because the values will be exactly the same. But the main thing, the dodge gives you like 1% less DPS. But the main thing is classic bosses will have less armor, classic trash mobs will have less armor, and that's a huge DPS increase. Like I'm talking like 100 DPS per warrior or something like that. So in total, the raid DPS will be higher in classic.
Saturnalia, I just remembered a conversation that I'm pretty sure it was you, that you had a bit of a back and forth in the show's Discord the other day about you'll have to remind me. It was an ability that warriors use, and someone was saying, I use this. Overpower. That's it. Thank you so much for reminding me. And someone was saying that they use it in their rotation, and you were saying that you don't. And they said, well, it had it accounted for about 1% of their damage in the logs that they showed. And you guys kind of agreed to disagree, but ultimately they said, well, if we're really being, hard on this definition of min-maxing, then overpower does have a place in it because it was, albeit just a tiny little bit, upping their DPS. And you were sort of saying it wasn't worth their while or what have you. Now, appreciating there's probably two sides of the argument there, and we've only got one member of that conversation here. I'd still ask, can you give a bit of a summary of what you guys were talking about and where we wound up with that one?
Well, just a slight correction. It was actually Skarm and Formas, I think, arguing that. But I can't speak on it because I had like kind of the same thought process of whether to switch to overpower or not. And really, like, from a real min-max perspective, there's very certain scenarios where you can overpower, but they are so few and far between that it's almost not even worth talking about because, one, you're switching to Sanctus, so you're going to lose rage if you have rage over 25 that's pulled, or you get like an unlucky Wind Fury when you swap. So there's that disadvantage to look at because you can swap to battle while you're doing the overpower, and then you're swinging, you get a Wind Fury, and then you're like, 60 rage and you're dumping, 35 of that, which, I mean, that's just a huge loss in DPS. And then, so you might as well just stay in Berserker and just hamstring if you want the flurry proc. So it's like, it's so insignificant to me.
I disagree on that. Pretty much as long as you're not delaying your Bloodthirst and Whirlwind, which are instant attacks, then Overpower will be worth to use, even if you're like dumping almost all your rage. Because Heroic Strike has such a bad like damage per rage ratio that Overpower is almost always worth using. But I mean, personally, I only use it when I'm like around 50 rage or so. It's not really worth the hassle. Like, it is a DPS increase, but it's not that big.
Any of you other
It'll
guys?
be more useful as well if you're at a lower gear level, so you're not crit capped, which a lot of these guys are in speedrunning guilds. I played in more casual guilds, even though I'm interested in theorycrafting. And if you're just pre-bis, like really baseline gear, like you have the axe from Emperor in BRD, and you don't have like rank 14 gear, then Overpower will be a lot more useful because you'll want to proc the flurry benefit, the flurry talent in Fury, where you get extra attacks.
I would say too, like this is what makes warriors one of the most interesting vanilla classes, in my opinion, because the mechanics are very intricate, and the optimal policy of DPS and rotation depends on gear level and buffs and all that. So this is where simulations can really help, because you can try like all these things, like should I overpower if I'm over 60 rage or over 65 rage? You can try all of those possibilities for your gear level and buff level and see exactly what is the best priority system for your set of abilities. And it's hard to make, I can see it both ways. It's hard to make blanket statements like you should always do this if this happens, but other classes don't have that kind of intricate system. A lot of classes of vanilla, unfortunately, are just one button spam.
Josh, do you remember your rogue talk with Kevin Jordan, where he said that rogues were the class for big brains and all that?
Yeah, not the case. It should be warriors.
Exactly.
Well, I think rogues are up there, but yeah, I would put warriors ahead of rogues.
I think rogues theorycraft about how to ninja people's loot and get away with it.
Well, as I said, like, I've popped into all the different class discords, and, I highlighted it for a reason. And I'll say again to the listeners, if you have not checked out the warrior or the druid class discords, for God's sakes, go and have a look, because these guys have some really, really hyper intelligent and intensive back and forths on the theory crafting side of things. And I don't disagree. I think warrior and probably, druid as well equally, are, they attract sort of the biggest brains, I feel. Not to say that the other classes don't attract big brains as well, but I think as a collective, you guys sort of gravitate towards those two a bit more, which is a bit surprising to me, because I thought, you don't really seem to see as much. Now, don't get me wrong, it is out there, but just in terms of pure prevalence, I thought healing would bring all the mad theory crafters who just broke it down to ridiculous extents with downranking and whatnot. Now, as I said, it is there if you look for it, but I think it's somewhat harder to find, and you spot more, melee theory crafting for the most part. Do you guys sort of agree or disagree with that? Like, I'm just surprised.
I agree with that. One thing I want to say about that too is this was pointed out to me by somebody else, or said by somebody else, and I agree that for healing, for melee, for example, for warriors, like we top meters is very satisfying. As a healer, healing meters work way differently than damage meters. If you're topping healing meters, you're probably not healing how you're supposed to. In other words, like you're either not following your assignment or not healing people that, like, because a single well-timed heal can save an encounter,
Yeah, regarding healing meters, like usually the ones at the top, they're assigned to raid healings, so they can snipe everyone in the raid. The lower are the ones who are healing tanks, because like tank takes less damage than the raid usually.
Exactly. So like if you're topping,
equally important.
They're equally important, but as far as like theory, who it attracts as far as theorycrafters goes, for damage, if you're topping damage meters, you're doing your job. For healing, it's not the case. So it's not you don't get rewarded as much for tryharding as a healer, I would say.
I would ask this in general. I mean, I've got obviously a lot of guys who've played warrior here, a lot of tanks. I'm trying healing for the first time seriously in Classic, and, the little of it I've done already in the beta I've loved, and I'm now sort of somewhat considering making that crossover to Holy when I had plans for Shadow. I'll see how I go. But to all the tanks out there and all you big brains tanks, I mean, what do you look for in a healer? What's your biggest pet peeves? What do you love that a healer does when they fucking nail it? You guys let me know.
Yeah, it's they have to be precasting. If they're not precasting, I'm gonna yell at them. And if they're using baby heals, I'm also gonna yell at them.
I was doing a 5-man. I was doing Dire Maul last night, and the healer was, I don't think he spoke English, whatever, but he was at full mana. He wasn't drinking. He was, we were standing there waiting for a patrol, and I was at like half health. And I'm like, top me off. Why am I still at half health if you're full mana and you're not drinking? That bothers the shit out of me. And when healers, know to top off a tank before a pull, I love it.
Also, like druids and priests, we use healing over time. Like half the time I have to click them off because they don't know when to use them. Like you don't use them, you only use them like during the longer fights where the small extra threat on the mobs doesn't matter. But if they use it like at the start of the pull, I just have to click it off every time.
Because they'll get aggro, yeah.
I just like a healer that's not just attentive to the healing, like healing the group, but also like the battle. Like if your tank goes around the corner, like you would want to know that. Like I shouldn't have to tell you that I'm running around the corner every.
Yeah, I like healers who dispel as well, which sounds self-explanatory, but
it's something that I'm struggling with because, as I said, like I'm literally getting a bit of a crash course in healing now. I've not done much of it at all in the past. Like prior to the beta, I'd healed like 2 or 3 dungeons, and now I've healed sort of 3 or 4 in the beta. And, just getting used to having Dispel and knowing what it does and needing to use it when it's applicable. Like I these poor guys who were so kind to me when I explained, like, guys, I'm really not much of a healer. I'm getting used to it. We ran Wailing Caverns, and obviously you get a lot of sleeps in there. And they were like, they were being, again, really nice about it, but they were like, you have this spell called Dispel. Use it on the people that get slept. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Got it. And then I proceeded to miss 95% of all the sleeps because I couldn't actually spot, and this is something obviously you get better with more experience. I couldn't spot when people were getting slept because I'm all the way in the back, sort of whether it's the right camera angle or what have you, or zoom or whatever. I couldn't spot it.
In that case, you look at their debuffs. Is the best way to do it.
Yeah, and that's what I got used to.
Did some add-ons for that. Like, I loved the Luna unit frames so much on Classic. It was far better than any unit frames I've used in retail. It's so easy to see when people get debuffs. It highlights when you can dispel it. and then you just make the Lula mouse over macro and just hover over them and instantly dispel.
And that's one of the difficulties, obviously, of doing beta without any add-ons. That it is a bit of a trip back in time, but yeah, it's all a bit of fun. Sorry, someone was going to jump in there.
So I've also dabbled in healing as well. Like on a couple of servers recently, I've had max level healers as well as tanks. So I've experienced both sides. Like if I can say tanks have a certain personality, like their leaders maybe, they get mad at people if they need to, but you also feel just like a Chad. Healers, on the other hand, like it's just constant stress. Like people are relying on you. If you go AFK as a tank, then people just wait. But if you go AFK as a healer, people just keep moving on, and it's very stressful having to keep up with all the mechanics, people moving around, and you also have to look at your bars and your dispels and people's health bars and the mechanics as well. So it's a lot of responsibility with not as much direct glory.
You also have, you also have a lot of people who just will, like tanks who just won't look at the healer's mana, who will just pull, and the healer's like, like 5% mana.
That's already
there are
becoming.
Also healers who don't know to manage their mana. Like in a dungeon, it triggers me so much. Like the healer is lets himself go complete loom, and then he starts drinking. Like you're supposed to, the correct way to drink in dungeons is first you run close enough so that you can heal the tank when he pulls. Then you start drinking. Drink as long as you can without the tank dying, and then you start healing. Like that way, you're almost never out of mana.
That's part of the skill cap for healers is making sure that the team as a whole coordinates, the regen process and the downranking and whatever, so that the raid can keep moving as quickly and smoothly as possible. That's one of the limiting factors are the healers balancing between healing and regen properly to keep those clear times down. So I really appreciate when the heal team manages that aspect of it really.
Yeah. One thing that people haven't really mentioned, I don't think anyone's actually talked about this, but I used it a lot. I think it was TBC where they introduced being able to use your mic inside of and so I was always saying like, all right, I need a drink, or I'm going to pull the next pack now, or whatever. And I doubt we'll get that in Classic, but it's just another point for parties just needing communication all the time.
I was going to say one more thing as a healer is, and you just, as you learn the encounters, as you continue doing raids, 5-mans, you'll learn when you need to heal and when you don't need to heal. For example, like just in Molten Core, for Lava Surger, if he charges the group, everyone takes, I think it's about 1,000 damage, right? So you'll see the whole raid's health just drop. But then once everyone stacks up, he's only hitting the tank. So if you know that, like, if you know how Lava Surger works as a healer, you're not going to panic when you see the whole raid's health drop, because you know that damage is not consistent. So you'll know just to keep the tank alive. And that just comes with, as you continue running.
It's funny that, sorry, it was either Nanook or Skarm, I think. I can't jump in, guys, whoever it was. But it's funny to hear you say that you felt that healing was more pressure than tanking, because I know it's only my one time doing it, and all of you guys will probably laugh about the first time that you tried tanking and the heart attacks that you had, but I shat my pants the first time I tanked, and I fucking hated the pressure. It was way too much, and I said never again. Healing, there's pressure, but I don't feel it's the same, and I really enjoy the fun sort of, not pressure, but intensity that healing brings to the game.
Well, that's part of the beauty of Classic. Like, I think I was the one talking about that before, but each class has their own role and you feel really satisfied in your role. And also different people have different kind of personalities and gravitate towards different classes. And with healing, for me personally, it's just a different kind of stress. You don't have as much people to support you. You're the only one who can heal. You're the only one who can dispel most of the time. Whereas with a tank, like you have other people you can always heal a DPS to like survive a fight. But if the healer dies, you're kind of in for a dangerous situation.
I think it's definitely more stressful to like start learning to tank, because you might lose aggro on a mob and you think it's really bad, but sometimes losing aggro on some mobs is the answer. Like you're just you don't always need to tank every mob in dungeons, for example. Like all the non-elites, the group should kill them first while you get aggro on the elites. Like you can mark one target with skull, mark the other with cross, build aggro on the cross while the group tanks the skull, and then you taunt off the skull. Like all these small tactics make the dungeon or like the tanking go much smoother. You don't always need to hold aggro on all mobs, but then the beginner tanks, they will always panic because they don't have all the mobs on them, for example.
Real quick, guys, we'll end the call on this point because I've got to get to another call after this one. But if I were to ask you, can you think, and we'll go through everyone one by one in case anyone has anything, but think of any funny stories you can remember from the first time or first few times that you tried tanking that players who will be playing Classic, who are either playing WoW for the first time or playing, vanilla for the first time, what they might be about to bump into. Does anyone have any sort of ridiculous things that they did that they can remember from the first time they said, fuck it, I'll go as a tank?
Not remembering to bring arrows as a tank, and I didn't know you could use arrows at the beginning. I thought that was only for hunt. So I was trying to face tank all the mobs in Ragefire Chasm on my first warrior. That was interesting.
For me, it's showing up with a one hand without the weapons.
Oh my god, every time.
Without the weapon skill, was it?
Yeah, because what'll happen is you'll just miss pretty much every attack while you're trying to spam Sunder to get it up or hamstring, whatever.
Yeah, part of the beauty of Warrior is that, or the not necessarily beauty, but torture, is that you need to level up all the weapons all the time in order to get a decent enough weapon skill when another upgrade drops.
It's going to be interesting to see all the people that weren't playing on private servers come back and play Classic because, the meta in retail vanilla was completely different. Like there were just garbage specs back then that people used that would be ridiculous to use today. I'm sure I used one of those garbage specs back in the day. I don't really remember, but since we've all had this private server experience, we're kind of like going to be showing the way to all the retail babies coming over to play Classic.
For me, it was really painless. Like I had played for a few years already before I tried tanking, and even if I played CPS, I learned how to heal and tank by watching other players because I felt they were doing something wrong. So I was always looking at. So really, it was just I started tanking because I felt others couldn't do it good enough.
Sorry, guys, I just remembered one last thing, and I did mean to ask this earlier. Skarm, I might start with you on this one, and anyone else jump in if you can think of anything. Are there any specs that are slightly off the beaten path or something you want to come up with of your own creation that you want to test out to see how it goes in Classic? Or are you pretty much just going, no, we know that the tried and true specs, the cookie cutters that we already have are going to be the way to go? Is there one or two talent points you want to mess around with and go like, this could create a new meta?
I don't know about creating a new meta, but something I tried out once so far and it was kind of fun is I spec'd Arms Fury, but instead of Mortal Strike, I had Death Wish, which sounds a little crazy, but the point of that was, and you have to have better gear for this, but I tanked a 5-man and you can pop Sweeping Strikes and Death Wish and just charge no pack and Whirlwind and just numbers. You'll hold aggro, you'll do a ton of damage. It's fun. You have to have a little bit of gear for it and Intensive Healer. And again, it's not something you'd really zone into a raid with, but it's, I've only tried it out once so far, but I want to try it out more in the future.
I personally have been experimenting with Slam Spec on Alliance. Everyone thought it was super bad, but I just wanted to try it out. If you don't have good dual wield weapons, it's a perfectly acceptable option. Slam Spec is just much harder to play than dual wield, but it's viable. And I actually ended up I tried 3 times in a Molten Gore. I ended up topping the meters every time. And keep in mind, all the other warriors were rank 14 and tryhards like me, so it's viable. In PvL, it wasn't that good though, because there weren't so many cleave fights where 2 hands shines. And one other thing, regarding tanking dungeons, a lot of people think that you need to go protection. The best dungeon tanking spec is actually arms due to sweeping strikes. If you have decent gear, you can just tank with 2 hands and do the most DPS while tanking.
One spec that I think is underrated that we might see a lot more of. On your Druid podcast, Kevin Jordan mentioned that he originally envisioned Druids as changing what they're doing on the fly, tanking, then DPSing, then healing. It's interesting how Theorycrafting kind of brings us back to where it all started. There's a spec that's been theorycrafted on private servers. Heart of the Wild spec is what I call it, but I guess there's different names. You go 30 points into Feral and the rest into healing. And so what'll happen is that you're tanking a mob, and then afterwards you just dispel after your mob's killed, or you heal. And so you're doing that in the same fight. Skarm actually has a really great video talking about this. Definitely going to shout out his channel.
Yeah. Please do. Skarm, what do people search for on YouTube to find you? Is it just Skarm or is it something else?
Just Skarm Tank. It's youtube.com/Skarm Tank. One word.
Very good. And I should say, does anyone else here YouTube or anything or have anything else to plug? Obviously, big plug again for the Warrior Discord. Go out and check that out. You can go and find Steppenwolf and the guys over there. Anyone else have anything to plug while we're here?
Not really at the moment. I mean, I'm gonna start streaming when the Classic comes out. Not currently.
Too easy. And it's Saturnalia. Obviously, we can plug yourself as the GM of the North American Countdown to Classic Guild on the Horde side.
Yeah, so if you want to play Horde, you want to play with Josh, you want to be a part of the community, just send me a DM after you join.
Yep, there's absolutely a few options for all of you to play with Countdown to Classic listeners, and that's one of them. So guys, do hit up Saturnalia or myself or anyone in the Discord, really, if you want to do that. But guys, I might stop it there if that's all right. Look, we could go on for another hour or two. I don't doubt we might have to do a part 2 one day if I can get you all together again. That'd be a lot of fun. But guys, thanks so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll just say a quick goodbye one by one. Nanook, thanks so much, mate.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. Anytime.
And Saturnalia, thanks again, man.
Thank you.
And Skarm.
Thank you for having me.
And Steppenwolf.
Thanks. Definitely at our time. There's like hours and hours of stuff to talk about.
I don't doubt it. And Vilius, thanks so much for dropping by again, mate. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Happy to join another time.
Hey everyone, after that last call, we received a bit more information from Blizzard via another blue post in that thread on the official forums, which shed further light on the subject. Now, normally I would do a TLDR, but I feel like this is one that should be read verbatim. So the interesting part of the post read as follows, quote, "There is some code in 1.12 that explicitly adds a modifier that causes the first 1% of plus hit gained from talents or gear to be ignored against monsters with more than 10 defense skill above the attacking player's weapon skill. This means that the so-called hit cap is in effect 9% rather than 8% for a player with 300 weapon skill fighting a level 63 monster with a defense skill of 315. With the weapon skill of 305, such as from sword specialization with humans or axe specialization with orcs, this hit modifier is no longer in place against +3 level monsters, provided that you are using the appropriate weapon type to gain the passive bonus. Needless to say, this makes plus weapon skill very good, and that emphasis was added by Blizzard, against raid level monsters. So, I asked Vilius what he thought of this extra piece of info as it dropped after our call, and he said that it means that we, being the Theorycrafters, weren't completely crazy in thinking something was off. He also mentioned that it's good that they posted that, as the Theorycrafters would have gone straight back to the forums after getting misses in 8% worth of hit gear with no weapon skill. So I do hope that provides an even deeper insight into some of the fun figures coming our way in Classic. Now, let's get to the next call. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and we are touching on a class in this call that is hopefully, maybe, going to be near and dear to my heart. We shall see when Classic rolls around. And we've got two priests on the line to talk about everything PvE with priests. We've touched on priests before on the show because we've talked about holy priests, we've talked about healing, but I wanted to talk about priests in general and the PvE side of things, whether you're going discipline, shadow, holy, whatever you might be doing, leveling up through the game and raiding. And we've got two guys on the line, a returnee, Fahq. How are you?
I'm doing great, Josh. Good to be back.
Good to have you back, mate. And Roger, a first-timer. So good to have you here.
Hey, glad to be here.
So, Roger, I'm so happy to have you here. You're someone who's actually recently put in a lot of work on the priest class in terms of putting together, in sheets and whatnot and breaking down the class a bit. And you mentioned to me that might be something that you'll be releasing to the wild soon. Tell us a little bit about the work that you've done on the class.
Well, mostly theory crafting stuff. So right now I'm working on a spreadsheet that will include, it'll allow the user to input basically everything, gear, talents, the fight length, every single variable. And then based on that, it'll calculate the total amount of healing that they can do during the fight if they use exclusively each rank of every healing spell. then you can see all the numbers for how it lays out. So you can see, if I use heal rank 4 or something, I can do 150,000. But if I use greater heal rank 2, I can only do 100,000 or something because I have 500 plus healing, and it just works out that way.
Okay, too easy. And Fahq, you've been on the show before, but why don't you just give everyone a little bit of a background of your history with priests?
I started the game in vanilla in late 04, 05, and I mained a priest all the way through Wrath of the Lich King. Did raiding through MC and BWL, did some AQ40, never got to Nax, and have recently been involved in private servers, looking at other classes and just seeing what I want to prep for Classic. But I did a lot of soloing as a priest at 60. I did a lot of dungeons and raids along the way, and as I got to 60, and just spent a lot of time with the class and getting very comfortable with it. So that's my background relative to the class. And I'm really glad that you are considering it. As you said, you keep going back and forth on that. You say, I'm definitely going to be a priest. I'm going to be a warlock. I strongly encourage you to take the class up. It's an outstanding class to play and a lot of fun throughout the entire game.
Well, it's still the front runner for sure. I'm getting weak as Classic gets closer, but we'll see how I go. Now, I should ask as well, you say obviously you spent a bit of time with the class. Would you say that that's been sort of a bit with all of the specs, or you've mainly stuck with one spec?
Oh, I went several specs. I got to the point where, especially when respecs were relatively inexpensive, I played around all the time. But even in vanilla, I did Shadow Priest for quite some time at level 60 solo, did some grinding on that, did some PvP on that. I've tried different PvP specs, different PvE specs, and I've used the two popular priest endgame rating specs, the one that goes to power infusion and then the one that's kind of dominant wholly for those long early fights when you can't just plow through content or you're not on farm status.
Okay. Well, look, let's maybe start all the way at the beginning. And Roger, I'll turn back to you and just sort of talk about that priest leveling experience a little bit. Now, I think you guys are going to tell me what I'm expecting to hear is that perhaps if you level as anything other than Shadow, you're crazy. There have been some arguments out there for the Smite Priest leveling up. Now, you guys might know a bit more about that than me, but obviously in the vast majority of places you're going to go on the web, they're going to say, go Shadow or bust when you're leveling. Talk to me about that leveling experience as a priest. Are you happy with it, Roger?
I love priest leveling. I find it very interesting managing your mana during it, the 5-second rule. Nowhere on any class is it more important than as a priest. Although I think it's something that all classes could learn to take into account more. Even if you're just playing a hunter, learning to use Serpent Sting and Arcane Shot back to back so that you don't spend as much time out of the 5-second rule can really make a difference. Okay.
And it's something where I've leveled a priest a number of times now, but as listeners to the show know, I only go up to about that, 25 to 35 range, and then I stop because I don't really want to spoil Classic too much. But also it's a time thing too. But I really do love wrapping my head around the mechanics of the Shadow Priest. And as you say, the 5-second rule is incredibly important. And it's the one class where if people aren't aware, it feels to me like your wand is much more of a trusty sidekick than perhaps with, the other caster classes. So Fahq, I'll turn to you. Tell me why it's so important to get a good wand early and how they work in the priest rotation.
So I think Roger covered it pretty well that you have very limited downtime. You are moving from mob to mob to mob, but a huge part of your DPS is a wand. And players that are used to casting or doing things for their damage other than physical attacks may not be used to that. But it is absolutely necessary to get a wand. They're essential to your DPS, whatever the spec is, as you're leveling, because you're regenning that mana while you are wanding. So your normal rotation is going to be something like a Mind Blast, a Dot, a Mind Flay, and then they're going to get close to you and you're just going to trade your health for the wand damage. And by the time you get to the next mob, most of that health is going to be back. Most of that spirit's going to be back and you're ready for a full pull if you have to burn something down. So wanding is really vital. I've been doing some crafting on leveling with a friend of mine who's playing a priest while I'm playing a mage. And we have the specific dungeons mapped out where we need to go through the quests we need to go through to get those wands at certain levels. And as somebody said in the chat, get your lesser magic wand as soon as you can. The difference is just unbelievable. You will be burning things down for a few levels. So once you get used to having a wand upgrade as early as you can get it, you're never going to look back.
Roger, would you go as far as saying that if you're sitting down at any point in time while you're leveling as a shadow priest, you're doing it wrong? Or do you think, every now and again, if you take a seat, it's not a big deal?
I actually would say that, when you're at level 45 plus or so, once you've really got your shadow form and your plus shadow damage talents going, you get the shadow damage boosting set that's around that level. Once you have that going, then it becomes about as good to just spam spells compared to wanding most of the time and letting your mana regenerate. And then, of course, drinking so that you can get back to the spamming spells. But the problem with that is that you spend a lot of money doing that. You go out of mana really quickly, you burn through gold like candy, and you're leveling at the same speed as the guy who's not spending any gold.
I'll keep you going on that one because listener Jamie brings up a really good point in Twitch chat and says, how about weaving those staff melee hits in between wanding a mob? What do you think about that?
I think it's optimal, but I'm also really lazy and I don't do it.
Fair enough. Fahq, do you go full ham and try hard and try to staff things as well as wanding them to death?
I'm with Roger. You're leveling for such a long time, and there's so much time when your brain's got to turn. It has to turn off to save energy. So I would rather, when I'm playing Classic, if I were leveling a priest from 0 to 60 as quickly as possible, I want as little cognitive energy spent on that so I can stay awake and do very little sleep. And wanding is just a no-brainer. You can talk to your friends, you can recoup, whatever. Staff weaving is cool, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I want to meet the priest who's like sitting down for his sessions and tying the red bandana around his head and putting on the black, paint under the eyes like Rambo and just running in with the staff hits between every mob. That'd be great to see how hardcore they take it. But, I'm with you guys. I think I'm probably too lazy and cut from a different cloth than that sort of min-maxy style for 60 levels. But, Roger, I'll turn to you and just say, okay, it's something that does get brought up every now and again by people who don't really know, who may not have touched the class before, but can we just sort of settle the argument, answer this one definitively? It's perfectly fine healing dungeons as a shadow priest through the leveling process. Is that right?
Absolutely true. It's not even remotely an issue until you're at like level 50 and you're getting into Sunken Temple and Blackrock Depths. That's the only time it becomes an issue. Before that, it'll be.
Well, that was the question. Definitely. If you had to draw a line of demarcation and, you're sort of maybe your Shadow Priest Mason Dixon line, if you will, something that separates us from them in terms of healing. Is there a dungeon that you go, all right, this is the point where you probably want to start going into Holy if you plan on healing? And it sounds like you've just sort of named a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. Sunken Temple is probably the first one because those Dragon Packs, they deal a lot of damage.
And Fahq, would you agree with that? That's probably the point of no return.
It is. It's tough to do dungeons in your 50s, and there's not a lot of them. The gains you're getting from the gear are not that beneficial until you get to 60 and respec anyway. So I encourage people, when you get to 50, just start burning your way through, find some people, realize that if you go on a dungeon, somebody might be a little upset if you're not spec'd to have some increase in Holy, because you do have hard hits, and unless you have a 60 running you through as a main tank, it's going to be challenging.
All right, guys, I've gone easy on you. I've given you the layup questions to start with the first 10 minutes. That's all well and good, but you guys are far more intelligent than just talking about the basics of the priest class, and that's why we've got you here, because now we're going to get into the meat of it. And you've just dinged 60. You're a priest. As we've talked about, you've waltzed through it all as a shadow priest. You had a good time. You've healed dungeons here and there, and it's all great. Now you're going to start raiding. Now you're looking towards endgame. Talk to me, Roger, about this decision that a priest has to make, that fork in the road of holy versus, or, holy or discipline, or a mixture of holy and discipline, versus sticking with the shadow tree, and what they should take into account in terms of getting into a guild if you go down one of those two paths.
Right. So Holy has pretty massive advantages in just about any kind of content you can manage apart from soloing out in the world compared to Shadow. If you're trying to get a dungeon group, it's going to be so much easier as a healer than a Shadow Priest. If you're trying to get in a raid guild, same thing. PvP, Shadow Priests are pretty good in PvP, but you're still going to be more impactful in the battleground as a healer, definitely.
Well, on that sort of, we'll focus on this Shadow Tree, and obviously we'll touch on Holy later. And let's say we've elected Fahq to make that Shadow choice. We've gone, I don't care what everyone says about healing. I know that, people think of priests and they generally knee-jerk reaction is to think of this amazing healer. But fuck you all. I'm going down the other route that's open to me, and I'm going to be a Shadow Priest. So we'll break it up into PvP and PvE. And maybe I'll start with PvP just lightly before we get to PvE. We talk about face melters. We joke about how, well, we don't joke about it, but we generally bring up that this is arguably the greatest one-on-one class in the game and one of the best PvP specs you can play in the game. Tell me why Shadow Priests are a force to be reckoned with on the battleground.
Well, I think the thing about Shadow Priests is good is that they have some of the physical protection that you can get from things like Inner Fire and Shadow Focus or Shadow Form that are going to reduce some of that immediate damage. They can have reduced Psychic Scream cooldown times, so it's a bit easier for them. They have Mind Flay, which slows you down. And then there are some talents in the discipline tree that can keep you going, a much stronger shield, the focus casting effect and martyrdom, where you get basically you have 6 seconds. You can't be interrupted or losing casting time when taking, or I shouldn't say it increases resistance by like 20% to interrupt effects. There are things you have in the priest tree that are designed to keep you casting holy healing spells during a raid that translate really well over to the PvP. Vampiric Embrace is good because every time you are doing damage, you're gaining some health back. You have a lot of control. And then let's say that you're getting low on health. Unlike a mage, you can heal yourself back up because you still have those healing spells. You just get out of Shadow Form if you're really close to the end with someone and you're dueling it down. So there's that flexibility that you have. There's the shield that comes with a priest. There's the inner focus free cast. They have a lot of range in what they're doing, and it's good, but it's good one-on-one. I think Roger really nailed it down. Your utility is going to be as a healer who has a lot of strength, stamina, and resistance and doesn't get knocked down, and it's just keeping everybody else up if you're doing pre-nades. But the great part about PvP is you can play that as much as you want once Battlegrounds come out, which we don't know when that's going to be, phase 2, 3, 4, whatever. Once they come out, you can play that ad nauseum, and you can do whatever form you want, and you can play without anybody's help and still learn and grow. You can't do that with the dungeons or the raids. Well, you can't do it with a raid unless you have the group of people. So I'd say that the Shadow Form is beneficial because you can do a lot of damage really quick. You can get out of situations you need to. You have a lot of interrupt protection, fear, crowd control stuff. But you still get to really damage people very, very quickly. So I had a ton of fun playing it when I did it.
Roger, one thing that's always sort of made me scratch my head is, as I said earlier, one of the best, if not the best, 1v1 class in the game. Everyone goes, spec, Shadow Priest. Everyone goes, if it's just you and someone else on opposite ends of the field and you see a Shadow Priest, you might be fucked. But one thing I've always wondered is why people throw in that caveat of 1v1. If a Shadow Priest has multiple enemies, let's say, 1v2, is that all of a sudden you're really screwed as a Shadow Priest, or am I reading too far into it?
So there are a couple reasons for that. I wouldn't say they're entirely screwed, but other classes like Mage, Warlock, just to compare the casters, they have a lot more CC. So you can fear one person and Shadow Bolt the other one. It's not going to break the fear, obviously. Even more so if Polymorph, where you can't even damage them, they go to full health. And also, Mage just has more things that they can do to multiple people. Like maybe normally in a 1v1 versus a rogue, you don't get to use counterspell, but hey, there's that mage over there and you just counterspelled them for 10 seconds, didn't even cost you a global cooldown. Priest doesn't really have that much like that. They have Psychic Scream, which is AoE if they're both getting up in your face. But a lot of the time, that's not going to be the case.
Okay.
So that's one of the biggest reasons, is that compared to other classes, they do not have very many good tools for dealing with multiple targets at the same time, whereas they have a lot of great tools for dealing with one target at a time. And also, they're more self-sufficient because they have the flexibility, as you said, to swap out, heal themselves back up. They can dispel magic, which is very helpful. Lots of factors like that. Also, just the benefits of Shadow Form with all the damage reduction and Inner Fire, Power Word Shield. They really just go for a long time without even needing to swap out of Shadow Form, without even needing to stop their basic nuke DPS very much.
Okay. Well, we'll move on from PvP to PvE because there's so much that I want to talk about here, because this is the reason why this is an important topic to me. Is I'm considering rolling this spec, and I want you guys to tell me if I'm crazy or not, basically, because obviously I'm going to have all the theory crafters kicking down my door going, Josh, don't do it. You're insane. Don't be that meme guy who rolls the Shadow Priest through raid content. You know, people won't even want you there for shadow weaving. You can do that as a holy weaver, you know, and whatnot. There's a number of different ways we talk about, you know, what the utility a priest can bring in terms of shadow weaving. You know, there's not necessarily just being boxed into that shadow spec that you can do it. But Fahq, what I'll ask is, talk about the plight of the Shadow Priest in general in terms of raiding. What kind of DPS numbers are we talking about? What can someone expect to see once they start, you know, going through that endgame content in their shadow form?
Oh, okay. So this is challenging. I would say, first off, Josh, you're going to have no trouble finding a raid that's going to take you playing whatever you are. You've been doing this for far too long, so someone's going to enjoy it.
The dirty little secret is I'm an asshole, though, so you've got to throw that in.
Someone's going to bring you along and say, "Hey, it's Josh." Yeah, it's a Shadow Priest. You know, their big benefit is helping warlocks, and that's why you can get to the shadow weaving and still have some healing stuff along the way. It's just really challenging to do, and it's only helping the people in your group, not the raid. The cost it depends who you're talking to, but I mean, I saw some numbers last week when I was browsing Theorycrafting where someone laid out MC max DPS, and you know, they had mages in like the 700 range. And they had shadow priests and redditans in like the low 4s, high 3s, and it's just one of those things of min maxers. If they're really pressed and they can have a mage that with less gear, they are gonna do better damage anyway. It's just going to be more challenging. They may have been told that they can't take Shadow Priests, they can't take Redditans, so they're just not even going to bother looking and you applying and going on a slot. That said, getting 40 people together is really hard, and just so many people that you've had on the show that talk about raids that are doing it on private servers say, I would rather take a skilled player than a player who is in the desired class but can't do what they're doing. The cost is the likelihood of a raid, any raid taking you is going to be much, much less than if you're doing what the class was designed to do. And just realize at some point they may say, this is great, you're awesome, but we're going to ask you to spec Holy Discipline now.
Okay. Roger, I'll turn to you. And I was telling this story earlier on a call this morning where I've been spending a bit of time on YouTube lately and trying to find vanilla raid content from obviously different specs point of view that I've been interested in. And I've been watching, you know, Holy Priest point of view. I've been watching Warlock's point of view, and I've been watching Shadow Priest point of view. There's not as much Shadow Priest content out there, but I found a video the other day that really raised my eyebrows because this was a Shadow Priest running through Nax that was near topping the charts. Like they were topping the charts at a certain point in terms of DPS. They're, you know, regularly number 2 or 3 and oftentimes topping it as well. And I was like, what the hell is going on? This is not what I've been told about the class. So I'd ask you, do you have much experience sort of top end rating as Shadow, dabbling in that spec there? I'm not sure if you were mainly just a Holy player, or if you didn't spend as much time as a Shadow Priest. Realistically, And I must throw in this caveat. Sorry. I know this is maybe private server shenanigans and all the values might be off. We keep that at the forefront of our mind. We talk about what we find on YouTube these days. But how high realistically do you think a Shadow Priest can expect to go up the charts if they're quite a handy player who might have all the buffs or pots that they need?
Unfortunately, I don't have much experience as a Shadow Priest. I'm a healer at heart. I love healing people. Love watching those green bars, keeping my green bars. So I haven't really ever theory crafted seriously Shadow Priests in Raid. I do know some basic things about them, like the coefficient for Mind Flay is part of the reason why they're so weak. It's really bad for how much damage per second they get out of each additional point of spell power. Even considering all the different shadow buffs that can be stacked up compared to other casters, it's just much lower.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, look, I think that video was a bit of an outlier, and as it's getting pointed out to me in Twitch chat, it very much so relies on obviously the people that you're raiding with as well. I do appreciate that for sure. But look, maybe I'll keep the Shadow Priest stream alive. We'll see how we go. I might change my mind and go with Holy. We'll see what happens. But Fahq, I'll turn back to you and just sort of say, let's tie off on Shadow Priest here and just sort of say, I think we would be remiss not to also discuss Holy Weavers at this point. We'll get to it back when we talk about the Holy spec later on, but we often talk about Shadow Priest being brought along just for that shadow weaving buff. Congratulations, Warlocks. Here I am. I'm a Shadow Priest. I'm here to give you a leg up. Do you still advocate for most guilds to bring that one Shadow Priest, or do you think that maybe it's better to do the Holy Weaver?
It depends on the guild and who they've got. If you have somebody that you want to bring along who's a Shadow Priest and you want to construct your raid around that person, it's taking up a group. And you're going to have 4 Warlocks with you, and there's all kinds of pros and cons along with that. And you're primarily healing, and then you're throwing some stuff up to make sure that the boss has that shadow weaving debuff on them. But the tough part about that is it's just a straight increase, and it's only for those 4 people, so they have to manage what they're doing relatively well. It's a lot of work just to get 4 out of 40 to be increasing their DPS, rather than some of these things that fundamentally hinder the boss or control the boss or make the fight overall easier for people. And again, it's hard when the priest has so many healing tools to say, look, we don't have enough good healers doing this thing. Can you do it, please? Because our warlocks are doing just fine without that one debuff to add on to the damage. So it's definitely doable. I think, I forget who has brought it up, but it's been said several times. There's the optimal versus the viable. Is a Shadow Priest or multiple Shadow Priests in a raid viable? Yeah. Is it optimal? The math doesn't really bear that out, but you can get down to shadow weaving in the tree and use some holy specs to increase your heals. You're just going to lose a lot of spots that are going to be largely useless. Spirit Tap is not going to make much of a difference. You're not going to be needing that extra Shadow Word pain damage. Your role is not to do damage, it's to heal. So you're spending like 15 points in talents just to get down to something that makes somebody else's job easier. So that's kind of why I think a lot of guilds have turned away from it.
Okay, very well put. Thanks for that. Now, look, Roger, here's what we'll do. I've been a bit unfair to you because I've started out talking about a spec that you haven't had as much experience with. All your work, I'm presuming, is obviously veering more towards the holy side of things. So let's get to talking about that and get you a bit more in your wheelhouse. Talk to me about an answer to this question, which is going to be very generic, but I'm sure there's a lot to it. And this is an argument that I've gotten involved with in the past, and I'm sure many people have. Are priests, or holy priests, I should say, the best healer in vanilla WoW, bar none?
Oh boy, that's a tough question.
Sorry.
You really threw the dynamite on me. All right. I would say in terms of raw healing power, Holy Priest's primary advantage is its versatility. You have Renew that you can use while you need to move during mechanics, whereas something like Holy Paladin, for example, can be really good when they just need to stand still, but you make them move around and all they have is Holy Shock every 30 seconds. And maybe they can throw something out, refresh a blessing, maybe, but since we have the long duration blessings in Classic, that won't even be the case.
Sorry.
So I see that as Priest's main advantage. Holy Paladins have an advantage in early content raiding, in that when you are still trying to get people together for Molten Core, if you don't have enough Holy Paladins to provide basic buff coverage, it's a big deal. It's a way bigger deal than having the additional healing from a Priest. Also, Holy Paladins perform very well at lower gear levels because their mana lasts forever. Flash of Light is so mana efficient, it's ridiculous. And they also get really good baseline bonuses in the form of Blessing of Light and the additional healing it provides, which does not depend at all on the rank. And as I said before, Holy Priest's main advantage is their versatility. They can heal everyone in the party with Prayer of Healing. They can heal on the go if renew. They can Power Word Shield to buffer the tank against damage. They just really get it all, and they're just overall the most flexible healer.
You'd be a great person to ask. How would you summarize, and you've raised this early just then with Paladins, but how would you summarize the Priest's level of mana efficiency?
Priest's mana efficiency is actually pretty good. Paladins are just on another plane of existence in terms of how good their mana efficiency is, but Priest mana efficiency is actually better than the other two classes. It's slightly better than Druids. They scale better with Spirit. They get more mana regeneration out of it. I think it's like this formula is Spirit divided by 4 for Priest, and it's Spirit divided by 5 for Druid. So it adds up. Okay.
Next thing I wanted to ask, and sorry, I'll get to you in a second, Fahq. I just want to round this one out with Roger. What would you say about the gameplay of the Holy Priest to people who maybe aren't very familiar with it and are considering it for Classic? Because as I've said, if I decide not to go the Shadow Road and, I get shouted down by people who say, don't do it, Josh. And I go, all right, maybe it's not the best. But the other reason is I'm considering being a Holy Priest because I've never healed before in any MMO. The thought of being a healer does intrigue me, and I think I am of that certain mindset that I could very much be attracted to the healing lifestyle. So tell me if rolling a Holy Priest devolves to one button spam, because I just sort of had a bit of fun with the Paladins talking about Paladin PvE. And I had a crack at them saying the Paladin lifestyle in raids is flash of light, flash of light, flash of light, flash of light. Now, I'm hoping that you're going to tell me that there's a lot more to priests than just spamming one spell, or do you find it kind of does boil down to that?
To a certain extent, it can. Typically, your most efficient spell is going to be spamming low rank healing spells. The more plus healing you have, the less difference there is overall, at least percentage-wise, between the various ranks of heals. So often you don't really need to up rank in order to keep everyone healed. However, good priests will always be fluctuating between using different ranks of heals depending on exactly how much healing the target needs at the time. So usually you'll have 3 or 4 different ranks of heal on your bar that you're using, and that's just for your basic heal. You'll also be throwing renews. Whenever you move, you pretty much should throw a renew. Maybe a down-ranked one on one of the raid members, maybe a full-rank one on one of the tanks. It just depends. Definitely never devolves into one-button mashing, which is unfortunately something that can happen with, for example, Paladins. Because of their mana efficiency, they can pretty much spam max rank Flash of Light all day, and they have some pretty strong reasons to not go for Holy Light because it's less flexible due to the 2.5 second casting time. Priests don't really have that problem, and they also have the other tools like Power Word Shield. Sometimes Power Word Shield is what you need. On Broodlord, maybe, your tank drops real low after a Mortal Strike, and your healing is doing 50% less now. Pop a Power Word Shield.
Now, Fahq, I'll turn back to you, and I'm getting congratulatory messages in Twitch chat for being able to continuously say your name with a straight face. But I wanted to ask something very quickly that's come up in Twitch chat that we haven't touched on yet. I don't think we needed to go into great depths on it, but listener High Five Dude I'm lying. Listener Wow Magic TV brings up the following question. I'd like to know the caller's thoughts on Alliance Priest race choice. Now, I find that this is something that obviously there's a lot of guides out there on YouTube and whatnot, and sort of written guides as well, that very succinctly give the answer as to if you're rolling Horde, if you're rolling Alliance. Obviously there's that unique thing with priests where the different races have, different racial abilities just for priests that come to the forefront. People will say if you're rolling Alliance, you want to be Dwarf, it's BIS for PvE and PvP. Oh my God, Fear Ward, how good is that? Do you basically just sign up to that and go, yeah, man, if you're Alliance, it's Dwarf, and if you're Horde, figure out whether you're rolling PvE or PvP and go from there? Or do you think there's a little bit more to it than that?
Well, you're fond of saying play whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
And that's what you should do. Human priests have spirit bonus and they have the rep bonus. If you're going to be playing by yourself a lot, or you're not going to be playing in raids, that can be a little bit beneficial. The benefits that dwarf priests get for raids and the utility that they have make it so strong that you could risk your spot being given to somebody else simply because they had that ability, especially if the guild is having trouble clearing certain fights. I just think it's dominant for that fear ward. It's necessary in so many fights early on. It's just fear-tastic in MC and BWL. So why not stack as many people as you can to help make that beneficial? It's just a reality that they bring something. I mained a human priest the entire way. And I know there were a couple fights where if I had been a dwarf priest, we would have had a much easier time dealing with that fight. So it's kind of that, yes, you can play what you want. You can play the aesthetics that you want. But if you're not playing dwarf, you're giving up something significant for your guild. And the horde, it really is just kind of, do you want to go PvE or PvP? Because that berserking every 3 minutes and that speed casting is so beneficial. If you can pop off a greater heal at the time you need it, and it is 25% faster, that can be a game changer. That can prevent wipes. So it's kind of tough to go against that if you want to play PvE. And the Will of the Forsaken is one of, if not the best PvP racials that are out there. So it's hard to avoid that one. There's a lot of reasons why people choose it. You're going to be fine either way. You're just giving something up that you may regret down the line when you wish that you had gone the optimum route is a 60.
Can I go into bat for Night Elf Priest for a second? Everyone kind of makes fun of Night Elf Priest, obviously. Is it Star Shards or whatever and whatnot that they get a bit of fun for? But I think they look cool. I really like the look of a Night Elf Priest. I don't know if you guys agree with me or not.
But you don't care what mounts look like. So you care what your character looks like, but you don't care the thing you're riding on.
Hey, I never said I wasn't a hypocrite, all right? So sorry?
I'm one of those weirdos who actually thinks dwarf females look pretty cute with some of their faces and like the pigtails and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're misunderstood.
So, maybe I'm not the best person to ask.
No, they're merely misunderstood. Let's bring them back for classic. Everyone roll a dwarf female. Just do it. You know you want to. But I'll stick with you, Fahq, and obviously Roger had a fair bit to say there on the holy spec. And I just wanted to dive into your experience with rolling holy and being a healer in general. Are you quite happy with how holy priests perform in vanilla and obviously the way in which they will in classic? But then also on top of that, let's say hypothetically, if you could change one thing with holy priests, what would it be?
I really like the holy priest. I think it's a very balanced class. The analogy I tell people who are interested in it is to kind of use a sports analogy. They're like the midfielder in football. They're the ones that have to kind of know what the field is. They can change the action. They have to keep an eye on stuff, how they anticipate, and they can facilitate a lot of things based on that. And as Def Camp Maldron did in their I think it was 55 or 51, where they talked about, rating it at the end game, and healing at the end game involves anticipation. And then you just had somebody on talking about AQ, and they were talking about everybody in the raid needs to know why they're doing something and what everyone else is doing. I think healing priests move themselves into that role probably more naturally than any other class, maybe shaman, where they need to know what is going on, what's happening, and how things are working. So you control the flow of the battle in an intellectual way that's really unique. And that's why I love the experience so much, because the challenge is never going to go away. And your role is so integral to the success of the raid. In terms of how they played in vanilla, I loved it. The only thing that I would probably change is the 31 point talent in Holy is pretty shit-tastic. A light well for 31 points is really awful, especially when you compare it to Power Infusion and Shadow Form. And my guild encouraged me, and I went shortly after we cleared MC to go Power Infusion, because it just benefited the mages so much more to have this nuke that I could give them. I mean, it really makes a big, big difference versus a static go and click on this, when everybody in the raid who can't heal themselves should have learned and be using first aid anyway. Maybe you could have made Shadow Weaving like a 3 rank talent, so that it wouldn't cost as much to get to 15%, and you could go down the trees a little bit and still be useful. But that's a debuff that's not meant for raids, really. But Lightwell, that's so disappointing to get all the way down the Holy Tree, and that's the crap you get.
You use that term unique, and I've got to tell you, you are a very unique American to call soccer football. So good for you. Kudos for that one. I'll pay that. That's what you were talking about, right? I presume, when you talked about the midfielder.
Yeah. Not American. Yeah. I mean, Yes, I follow football quite well, and midfielders are my favorite.
Yes. Sorry, are you American or Canadian?
No, I'm American.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Lived in France for a while, and
no, good man. And that was episode 51 of Countdown. I believe you were referencing with Def Camp and Meldron when they came to talk about healing. Now, you brought up a really good point, and Roger, I'm going to throw this one to you to keep running with the ball. Fahq, you just mentioned Lightwell, and I've often wondered, is Lightwell the worst 31 point talent in the game? What do you think as a long-time Holy Priest?
I would say so, yes. There are a few niche applications I've heard for it, like using it on Lotheb. That was a really interesting video. But in general, yeah, there's pretty much no 31 point talent in the game that's worth.
I just don't recall. I can't bring to mind another that is just actively discouraged amongst everyone who plays the class not to touch.
Oh yeah, there's definitely no parallel for any other class. Even some of the 21 point talents that most classes get, you don't hear people saying, "Oh, don't put a point in that," let alone a 31 point.
Do you recall ever trying to use Lightwell on a frequent basis and being the guy screaming at the guild, just give it a try, just click the Lightwell, come on, it's really cool, guys? Or was it just never really an option?
I don't have any experience of any loonies like that.
How about you, Fahq? Did you ever try to be the madman screaming for it? Yeah.
I tried it once, and my raid leader just said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm popping a Lightwell." And he said, "Get out of that immediately," because no one used it. I felt embarrassed and small.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Now, guys, let's move on to discipline. And Fahq, I'll get you to talk about this one, because it's obviously, we talk about power infusion. It's something I'm still relatively unfamiliar with, but again, we come back to shadow weaving. It's something there that other classes love priests for. And then power infusion. Again, we're just there to obviously make other people love us. Well, another talent that benefits others rather than ourselves. Do you think it's an amazing talent? Talk to us more about power infusion.
It's a really outstanding talent. So you've got a 3-minute cooldown. Even though it's expensive, you are giving somebody a 15-second boost of 20% spell damage. So to kind of put that in context, I think the Ani buff, isn't that 10%? or it's 5%. It's something like that. But you can do this every 3 minutes for 15 seconds to a caster. And think about that damage boost that they can do in situations, especially fights that require some quick output and might be over in 5 to 10 minutes, especially if you are on farm with stuff. You want to down something really quickly. You want to have your lock or your mage, somebody who can just really crank out damage very quickly, putting out as much as they possibly can. And if you time it right, you can get it for their big hit spells. So they're stacking Scorch and they're ready to fire, and you put it on them right then and they can just explode the boss. So you get all the way down the tree, and there you're helping the entire raid's DPS for those 15 seconds rather than, the fear of playing whack-a-mole or spamming the low-rank greater heal on the tank just to keep them up. It really benefits guilds very highly, and I could argue better than the extra healing that you could get down the holy tree.
Okay. Now, Roger, I'll turn to you, and again, scrubs like me don't understand, the benefits or the pros and cons between the two. Talk to me about your experience with why someone might go a mixture or a little bit of, holy and discipline versus, we talk about that power infusion spec versus more of a pure holy spec.
Right. So a lot of the best talents in the holy tree are deeper down, like spiritual guidance can be pretty good. You get 300 to 400 spirit when you're all raid buffed, and that's a lot of plus healing. Same thing with the bonus healing talent at the end. It all really adds up, and if you go power infusion spec, then you miss out on that. I think overall, in terms of just the damage gained versus the healing lost, looking at it without factoring in other situations, it looks like the healing is better. However, when you have other factors like Cthulhu vulnerability phase or needing to burst down the last percentages of Huhuran really fast because she's volleying your raid of poison, that's when power infusion really shines. But there's definitely an argument for either. Power infusion is definitely better when you're on farm, because a lot of the times you have way too much healing output. Then your healers are so comfortable, they're bored even, and so it just makes things more fun for everyone, really, to have power infusion in that case.
Well, hearing what we've heard about power infusion, Roger, what do you say is your ultimate? Well, maybe we'll divide between the two. Maybe it might be the same answer. What's your ultimate, through the work that you've done, healing spec for a priest in vanilla WoW? And maybe also, is it also your favorite, or is your favorite spec a little bit of a tweak?
Ultimate is really hard to say. I think there's a lot of different priest specs for different applications. Maybe you're mainly someone who's putting renew on everyone when you're in later tiers where there's a lot of AoE damage. That can be really viable. So you might have a build that's more focused around getting the 10% mana reduction on instant casts and boosting up your renew healing. And just, there's so many different specs. You could go the deep holy, and that's focused on just maximizing your healing. You go all the way up until light well, but not putting a point in it, and the rest in disc. That's kind of the classic solo healer heal spec. But you could also sacrifice a little bit and get divine spirit, which is great for if you're just doing dungeons. There's a lot of little tweaks you can do. If you want to be more viable for PvP, you can take some of the points and put it in martyrdom. You can take some of the points and put it in blessed recovery. There's just so many different modifications and so much versatility.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that PvP angle just a little bit. And Fahq, I'll come back to you and say, people obviously do raise, if you're not going to go the Shadow Priest angle, some people do raise that holy disc angle in PvP, either world PvP or in, mainly battlegrounds. Tell me why, if you're running BGs all the time, that holy disc tree mixture can be a lot of fun.
Well, I think one of the benefits you're getting with that is the armor bonus that you get from Inner Fire. As Roger said, the martyrdom, the blessed recovery gets you healing 24% of the damage over 6 seconds. It makes you a lot harder to kill. And you're going to be one of the people that they are going to try to kill in battlegrounds very quickly because you're keeping everybody else up. And again, your job is to be a flexible healer who is not only going to keep yourself alive, but keep other people alive. And as he said, there's so many elements in the trees. Priests are really designed to be that versatile class. Do you want to be an attacking midfielder? Do you want to be a defending midfielder? Do you want to be a controlling midfielder? What do you want to do? How you decide to spec it out. There's so many different options. There's just a couple of spells like the range of Smite, the Holy Reach. Maybe it's not quite as strong. The Spirit of Redemption is always one I have a problem with, but in PvP it has some application. In a raid, you shouldn't be dying, so Spirit of Redemption, you can help some people while you're in death. There's just so many choices that it really depends on what kind of player you are and what you like to do and who you run with, that you can go so many different specs. But I think Roger really hit the 30-21 spec as the common spec for dungeons, and then just put it into Martyrdom, put points into Blessed Recovery, put points into Improved Mana Burn if part of your strategy is to burn down casters. I don't know how effective that is, but some people really have done it and liked it. But it's choose your spec and find out what's going to work for you in PvP, and just practice PvP as much as you can.
Okay. Now, just back to PvE content, Roger, just in general, now that we've kind of covered all the specs, do you find that there's a point in the game, maybe after a certain raid, if they've sort of gotten all of a certain tier, where priests really do jump to the head of the pack, quite obviously, in terms of healing?
I wouldn't say so. Resto Shaman, for example, scale very well with plus healing, just the raw amount of additional healing that all the chain heal bounces when you have the tier 2 set bonus. And also, you can pair that with the T2.5 for the 0.4 second cast time reduction, I believe. Those pair really well and make it so that you can crank out a lot of healing really fast as a Resto Shaman, just as a example. I do believe they end up outscaling Paladins eventually. Paladins tend not to scale quite as good because although they do scale very well with crit in terms of mana efficiency, they're able to very easily spam max strength Flash of Light. Even at like Molten Core gear levels, they can do that. And when you're pushing max Ramus gear, you can start, if you're world buffed up with all that spell crit, you can start branching into using some high ranks of Holy Light instead, and it can be better, but it's just not quite as good. So Priest definitely takes off over Paladin in the late game. Druid, Priest, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you're on, they just scale better than Druid in a lot of different areas. It's very slight too. So hardcore raiders will often take 3 or 4 Druids, and it's no big deal. It's not like taking, it's not like it's a meme spec or anything like that, but it's not optimal.
Now, Fahq, just in general, is there a certain point or a certain thing that you're really looking forward to? I presume that you're rolling Priest again for Classic. Is there something that you're really looking forward to doing with your Priest? Is there a raid that you can't wait to heal through? Is there an item you can't wait to get? What is the carrot on the stick for you with Priest in Classic?
I'll have to go back to 2005 because I hate to disappoint you. I'm rolling a mage. I partly because I did so much with my Priest, and I did so many fights, and I did so many hard challenges. I got the gear that I wanted. I did the things that I wanted. It was all very enjoyable, but I want to try something completely different. So I was Alliance. I was a human priest. I'm going Horde. I'm rolling a mage. So that's just my opportunity to do something different. What I can say is if you were going to put me back in the situation and say, okay, this is what you're going to heal, it is the battles that require movement and lots of pieces moving at the same time. And I never got to Cthulhu, I never got to Twin Imps. The only time I did Nax was as a 70 in preparation for Lich King. So I never really had the experience of those intense battles where all the parts are moving at the same time. That's the one I would really, really like to try, because my experience was limited to Molten Core, BWL, and a bit of AQ40 in the beginning. So raids where it requires some movement and I have to keep track of you and you're getting smacked all the time by ambient damage, meteor stuff, that kind of thing really appealed to me, and I never got to try it at the elite level. So I'm going to miss that, but I'm going to probably enjoy the hell out of everything else.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, I mean, I'm totally with you there in terms of maybe jumping into another class that, veering away from a class that you spent a lot of time with before, because everyone knows that all I played was Rogue back in the day, and I am so done with that class. I'm looking forward to trying something new. Roger, I'll turn back to you and maybe ask you the same question. What are you looking forward to doing most with, well, again, I shouldn't presume that you're rolling Priest in Classic. I should ask what you're actually planning on rolling. But if you, whether you are or aren't rolling a priest, what would you be looking forward to doing most, or what item would you be looking forward to collecting the most, or what milestone would you be looking to hit if you were doing a priest in Classic?
Well, one of the things I'm looking forward to the most, because I originally played Priest on the Chronos 2 server, and mind control didn't work properly there. So I'm really looking forward to learning all the elite humanoid mobs and what they do, and mind controlling them and seeing, what I can do with them and if they're useful or not, and just learning all that stuff. So that's an exciting aspect of Priest that I haven't had the opportunity to explore before, and I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Mind control is fantastic. You're going to have a heck of a time.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up that we haven't touched on yet. I might ask you guys just loosely and generally, do you guys recall any great mind control stories?
Apart from people getting thrown out off LM all the time.
That's really when we used it. I mean, there were times that we would use it in a raid to control a certain trash mob, but most of the mobs that you're getting there really aren't that helpful. You might initiate combat a certain way and then fade out. You use it for the buff in, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget it. I don't know if it's Elbers or BRD before you go in, the fire resistance buff. If you're going to take down Rag, there's the mob in there that we would stalk our priest, and you had to know, okay, I'm going to get this guy and buff as many people, and then let's get out and reset it. So that is probably one of the coolest parts of mind control. But as Roger said, there's some elite mobs in the game and in instances that do attacks that are just fun to play with. So now you get to do something your class could never do and control it. And I don't really think anybody else has that kind of opportunity where they can take on those roles. Roger, are there any other classes?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Roger, I might finish up with you just to round out the call on this one. And please do feel free to plug away for what you've done. But as we mentioned, you might be releasing it soon, this spreadsheet that you've been working so hard on. While you were doing your work on that and delving really, really deep into the theory crafting side of priests, were there any surprises along the way? Was there anything that you crunched the numbers on and sort of went like, wow, I really wasn't expecting that result?
I'm not sure there were really any particularly big. I was a little surprised at some of the AQ books, for example. They give you access to the last rank of a lot of heals for classes, and some of them are just like minor steps up, kind of like you would expect when you normally rank up a spell. There's a certain pattern to it. The mana cost goes up by this much, the healing goes up by this much. I was really impressed with the ones that the druids get. It really makes their max rank of healing touch very mana efficient compared to the second highest one that they have access to for the AQ books.
Fair enough. Now, guys, I'll just round out with your final thoughts on priests in general. Fahq, I'll get you to start off, and then we'll finish with Roger. Tell me if there's anything we haven't touched on that you feel people really should know about priests going into Classic. Is there any sort of vague warnings that you throw out there? Like, if you're thinking of rolling priests, you better know about these kinds of limitations. Or would you say that this is a really fun class that perhaps isn't talked about enough and you'd love to see more people trying it out in Classic?
I'd say if you the versatility of this class is the most important. If you like doing damage and you don't mind playing PvP, you can go do damage and you can play PvP. If you want to do PvE, you're going to be in a support role, but you're going to be managing so many things. The thing, I mean, if I'm giving you some overall advice, let me say, okay, so the rule of three. First, know the fucking fights. Learn them, get them really well. Rule 2, know the fucking fights. You have to know what the boss is going to do when and who, and don't be upset if it takes you a few times and some people die. If people die, that's okay. That's part of the learning process. And then the last thing I'd tell you is if you really want to learn the class, do 5-mans along the way. You will learn so many mechanics about line of sight. You're not going to really learn downranking, but you're going to learn different abilities and things you weren't expecting. You're going to get away from tank and spank. And some of these 5-mans, you're going to have to think of how different classes interact with the different bosses and mobs, how they draw threat, who you have to anticipate. All of that comes from 5-mans. So if you're on a 0 to 60 min max, get there as quickly as possible, and you don't want to play private servers, you're going to have a really hard time at 60 in a raid environment dealing with that anticipation unless you spend a lot of time at the upper end 5-mans once you have reached 60. So if you do that, you're going to be in great shape. And Josh, really looking forward to seeing you play Priest.
I hope I stick to my guns. I wish I could do this for you and lock it in, but I'm going to come and say what I'm going to play much, much closer to release. Look, Warlock still has a really good chance, but we'll see. Fingers crossed. Now, Roger, anything to add on to what Fahq you had to say in terms of things that people should know going into Classic if they're considering rolling a Priest?
Well, I think he hit it right on the money with especially just because if you level in dungeons and you heal in them, and maybe you're only at level 30 or 40, you're doing Scarlet Monastery or something, maybe you just find the playstyle isn't for you. It's important part of the vanilla experience to experience group content and learn how your class and role functions in it. And it can really allow you to make a much more informed decision about what class you want to play. And if you love healing in those lower level dungeons, then, Priest is the right class for you.
Okay, fantastic. Guys, this has been a great call. You've obviously answered a lot of questions for me. You've put my mind at ease a little bit about a few things. I've still got many things I want to sort of figure out later down the track and see if Priest is the class that I ultimately will commit to for Classic. It's a big commitment considering I'm not a guy who generally rolls alts a lot. So I know that once I pick a class, it's kind of like, that's it for me. I don't generally do the divorce. I'll see how I go. But thanks so much again for stopping by to sort of help us out with your expertise. And Fahq you, it's been a pleasure to talk to you again. I hope to get you back another time.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
And Roger, first timer, you did so well, mate. I can't thank you enough. I really do appreciate it. And please do plug away, Roger. Is there anywhere that people can find you online or something that you want to let people know? Obviously, you've done your sheet. Did you want me to throw a link in? I'll happily do that in the show notes or anything. Or where can people find you and your work?
So I'm going to release the spreadsheet pretty soon, probably a week or two here. You can find me. You'll just see it on the Classic WoW subreddit. That's where I'll.
Too easy. Okay, guys. Thanks so much again. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Josh.
And that's the show for today, everyone. But be sure to tune in next week as we have even more calls for you. So please do listen in then for more Countdown. But before you go, let's have some fun and see if we can get through all the thank yous in one breath. Here we go with a thank you to the following patrons. 8 Count, Aero PC, Anti, Bear of Pain, Binger, Brandon K, Callum F, Chunky Dunk, CJ, Connor C, Damien A, David F, David J, DJ M, Dufficus, Goat Rope, Halsey Spartan, Hurlbert, James S, Jamie S, John HC, Josh W, Michael H, Minoru, Patrick J, Randall H, Rasmus S, Rarebit, Rick S, Ryan K, Schmig, Sylvia K. I couldn't do it. Sylvia K, Tim B, Tim S, Tom S, Torbjorn C, Voikora, and Zudamos. And of course, The very dedicated, legendary patrons of Countdown to Classic, an extra special shout out and thank you from the bottom of my heart to those who dig very, very deep for the show every month in Alice R, Billy C, Eddie S, Eric S, Firespit Kitten, Flosy B, Freaky Fritz, Galgamir, Ida B, Batlord, Carl W, Nick B, Palfurus, Sierra S, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Mar, Vanifak, and Valaco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be on the air without your support. So that's it for today, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you all next time.